Welcome to Human Reaction, your source, weekly commentary on cultural news and politics, where we help you fight them on a narrative and resist media misdirection. Obviously, I am not Joe Sheehan. I am his much uglier, older friend who lacks the beautiful red hair. But you have to deal with me and Kyle this week. Say hi, Kyle.
Hello. Yeah, we're also down with our CIA asset in the back, too.
Right, so no cool sounds.
It's actually just the two of us.
No sound effects. This is depressing. We're going to make it cool. It's going to be happy and fun. Why did I say we're depressing around that? That's terrible advertising.
We're sad.
Yeah, we're sad.
We're just sad, lonely people.
So what are we talking about today?
So new Twitter files just released. There's a CIA lady spy that's trying to take down the big orange giant. We got Crypto Week in Congress. Congress is melting down faster than Dogecoin.
Nice.
And conservatives love to lose. And that's it. That's all it is.
It is a joke. It is a joke. And before we get started, just want to remind you to like, follow, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave us a review wherever you're at. Spotify, for example, we get a lot of Spotify listeners who have not given us those stars. Give us some stars, man. We're like Mario. We need those stars. And then thank you to our members.
It makes us invincible.
Exactly. All right, thank you to our members, our latest supporter, Justin. Thank you for subscribing, Justin. And lastly, if you want some cool swag like that hat right there, go to humanreactionpod.com, get yourself some swag, help support the show. Appreciate everything you do. And
join our Discord, too, where we talk about news, people debate things in there, and we also post dank memes. Our meme this week comes from Emily, one of our supporters, and it is a little homage to both Boeing and the Iranian helicopters going down. Everything's just falling out of the sky, it seems like.
Yeah, there was also a meteor in like Spain or something like that, like Madrid or something like that.
Yeah.
Crazy viral. And then lastly, and this is referring to the president of Iran, his helicopter crashed into a mountain. The question is was it Boeing that did it?
Boeing
was a whistleblower.
Boeing has a track record. What did the Iranians know about Boeing?
It's the new Hillary Clinton thing. It's like anytime someone dies, someone just like, oh, Boeing? They have information leading to the arrest of Hillary Clinton or Boeing.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management, Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL Patriots.com. This episode is brought to you by Revved Up Promo, the official apparel partner of Human Reaction. Revved Up is a premier full-service shop specializing in laser engraving, screen printing, and embroidery. Not only are they now making all of our apparel right down the road from us, they can do the same for your brand and ship it to you anywhere in the world. Revved Up helps you navigate the extensive universe of merch options and uses state-of-the-art techniques to showcase your brand in its very best light. So if you want to support our show and our generous sponsor, you can now do so by buying our merch and by turning to Revved Up Promo for your own custom apparel needs. Reach them at revveduppromo.com. That's with 2 V's and 2 P's, or just check the show notes for a link.
All right. So first up, the greatest reporter of our generation, of our age,
Really has become that.
Of the 21st century so far, Michael Shellenberger. Now, just a quick reminder, Michael Shellenberger is a dude who started like in the environmentalist movement for Environmental Progress was his organization, right?
Yeah.
He was like part of the Soros network. And then at some point,
he became super based.
Yeah, I think it was nuclear energy. Like he was like, why aren't we pro-nuke? And he got into nuclear energy and all the environmentalists attacked him and he was like, this is nuts. And so then like what happens, the leftists of all the talent and all the intellectual integrity discover what's going on and then move to a more
also like
position.
Homelessness in San Francisco, things like that. Because California, he just started to be like, oh, things aren't well in the state of Denmark, basically.
You can't say that. That's racist. So he put out a new Twitter file. So remember, a Twitter files is when Elon Musk bought Twitter. He said, hey, Shellenberger and Matt Taibbi and a bunch of reporters, independent Substack and Twitter reporters, here's the Twitter files. Here's all the information for the Twitter files. Basically, when he bought Twitter, he wanted to both reform it, but then also expose how these things were controlled. And so a lot of these other Twitter files have been out, everything from the Brazil X files, which we've covered. We have a great monologue on that, to other ones like the CTII files and stuff like that. Well, this week, Schellenberger came out with the CIA files and specific Central Intelligence Agency connections to an effort in 2021 to 2022 for the CIA to control the content moderation system at Twitter. And it is a interesting web. I mean, it's a very long thread. Like you can see it here, that just how much information it is. But what I want to do is kind of go through each of the actors and kind of point this out, because this is something that happened over 2 years, from really 2020 to 2022, of an effort to use. And what's interesting about this is how similar it is to the same stuff that goes on in the ESG DEI space.
Yeah.
You have a corporation that's doing a thing, that's selling a particular service, and you bring in third-party consultants that kind of drive it into a different direction. Some of this is like employees being hired and what they did once they got hired, with their backgrounds being intelligence asset connected. And
Strange coincidence.
yeah, and a specific group called I want to call it Alethala, because Alethala is a fictional world that I designed, or a fictional city-state. But it's Aletheia.
Aletheia, yes.
Aletheia is the group, and some stuff with their founder, Lisa Kaplan, and stuff like that. So we'll start from the very top. First person we need to talk about is Jim Baker. So Jim Baker is a former FBI general counsel, right? He was the dude who goes to Twitter in 2020. He was the main reason, like recommending, from what the information we have from the Twitter files, for suppressing the Biden laptop story. The evidence suggests he was supportive of using external vendors like Aletheia for disinformation analysis. Now, remember, like, the mission of these sorts of groups is always to say, we're trying to stop what happened in 2016. So he said, well, we need help with this disinformation analysis. We're not qualified to do it, so we need to bring in this other group, Aletheia.
Well, yeah, and this Jim Baker guy, because I just remember from the Twitter files, like I remember that name floating around. Was he? Yeah, he was former FBI general counsel. That's what he was. Okay.
Yeah, obviously not CIA, but we know that CIA and FBI have a lot of bounce between. But yeah, I mean, this. Well,
I remember this guy's name just popping up everywhere, and I remember it was like Barry Weiss, or maybe it was Schellenberger. They were trying to get a hold of him, and there was some. I can't remember the exact details, but there was some like shenanigans that he was pulling on them. If I remember right. I can't remember.
Well, What's clever, what's interesting here is that there was really two people who were driving the "we need an outside group" narrative, according to the reporting so far, which is Jim Baker, and the other guy is Peter Zatko, which we'll get to him towards the end. But those two folks from like the legal counsel side, which is what he was doing at Twitter, he was like their lead lawyer, right? He's literally the former FBI general counsel, and he got hired on Twitter. So that kind of throws some red flags right off the bat, right?
Yeah.
And then when he gets in, he's saying, we need to bring in this outside group. The next one's Nina Jankowicz, who is a former intelligence community analyst and author. The interesting thing there is, if I caught it right, and I did ask, or I did look through carefully on this particular question, it isn't really clear where Nina came from, in terms of which community was she an analyst for. But she was with them. She was kind of like one of the main workers at the Aletheia group on the disinformation analysis of Twitter. So she was like the hands-on person, but was never employed at Twitter. But her role at Aletheia included providing expert advice on Russian language. Now, remember, this is a response to Donald Trump supposedly being elected by Russian fraud,
Russian hackers,
Russian language,
stuff, right?
and cultural analysis, and later public-facing tasks like website updates and media liaison. Despite her claims of limited involvement, documents show that she was listed as a, quote, technical research director for work related to Twitter's misinformation management during the 2020 election, indicating a deeper involvement with Twitter's content moderation strategies. So we have a quote from her book, which I think is kind of revelatory on Nina Jankowicz. So one of the interesting things about Nina too is she's probably the one who has been the most out, and I think we've actually talked about her before on another part of the CTIL files. She's been very out with her particular. If you go down, I think it's below, there's a quote from the book I wanted to read. Right here. The purpose of the book is to sound the alarm of an off revision. Yeah. Quote, the Biden-Harris administration can and should take up many of the solutions outlined in this book, she writes. If the West is to win the, quote, information war, end quote, it needs a whole of society response, like the U.S. and NATO used in Eastern Europe. She means during the Cold War. She praises a NATO cybersecurity expert for having created the, quote, center of excellence, end quote.
The center of excellence, that's also, because that's something Mike Benz talks about a lot, is that there's these like groups and they're called the center of excellence. Isn't there a thing about that? I'm
not tracking that one.
Yeah, I know I've heard Mike Benz use that phraseology quite a bit.
Okay, so the reason this is talking about Matt Taibbi's report on the same thing. Okay. Here's the censorship Easter egg a lot of folks will miss. The reason VP proposed the term mis/disinfo, quote, center of excellence, COE, is because that was the name NATO called its domestic censorship hybrid warfare centers in Central Eastern Europe. They were called hybrid COEs.
Interesting.
So it's pretty out with Nina's quote here that what she's referring to is the NATO approach. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting is just grasping the mental model here of people's speech, domestic and foreign speech, as being part of an information warfare like landscape, similar to the way we'd think about or conceptualize the Cold War or other sorts of actual physical war spaces. When that is like very contradictory, right, Kyle, to the traditional conception of how to think about speech.
It goes into the term right here in the post. we should just gone a paragraph lower. If that term sounds familiar to close observers of the censorship industrial complex, it might be because Renee DiResta of the Stanford Internet Observatory in 2021 promoted a center of excellence in a Department of Homeland Security video she recorded, in which she made the case for the Disinformation Governance Board Jackowitz would later briefly head up. And Renee DiResta was one of the lead people. She was part of a group that was part of the leads on the Russian troll farm stories during the 2016 election. So you start to see these things start to pile up more and more, right?
Right. So this kind of parallels in with another person that was one of the senior analysts for the Alethea Group, who contributed to Twitter's disinformation efforts, according to the report, is on her LinkedIn a former CIA analyst. So we have that particular angle. So Nina Jankowicz, Jim Baker, Cindy Otis. Now let's just dive into who is the Alethea Group. So if you read their website, right, they say they're a consulting firm specializing in disinformation and misinformation analysis. Now let's go over those words real quick. Disinformation is information that I'm specifically putting out to manipulate you, right? I'm going to tell you the election day is on Wednesday so that you don't go vote on Tuesday. Right. Misinformation is information I accidentally say, right? I accidentally give out false information. It's not with intent. It's the difference between like murder and manslaughter. So the work essentially involves identifying and countering online disinformation campaigns, right? So if you want to overthrow democracy, you give out a bunch of disinformation campaigns, right? And its staff includes former intelligence community analysts. The group has been involved in advising and content moderation and threat analysis, particularly in relation to misinformation on significant events like elections. Now, that's the official line. Now, what we know from the CTII files, from other reports from Michael Schellenberger, is that this is always the front. What it winds up doing is saying, no, you can't talk about the Biden laptop story. It always results in...
It results in
neoliberalism.
It results in whatever helps a certain side achieve victory in the power games. Right. Like that's,
right. They're not going in and being like, hey, there's actually one video we won't go over this time where she's talking about Bolsonaro, which is so funny with the Twitter file stuff. It's just like, well, he would put out all these false things, false, terrible things, right? And you literally have at the exact same time, like President Biden, like literally saying completely false things, like calling his sister his wife, and like, or like completely confused about when he went to Detroit for some, reason, like you have all these things, but they're not going after that. They're going after Bolsonaro. Why? Probably because he's not a neoliberal.
He's not part of the global order that is trying to be,
yes,
built upon.
Exactly. So it just always so happens to be justified in classical liberal terms, right? Concerned about the manipulation of the public for some nefarious means, but in reality, it gets enforced otherwise. So who is Lisa Kaplan? Excuse me, pardon me. Yeah, she's the founder and CEO of the Alethea Group. So she's like the main dog. She's the, what would you call the joke up front? The white lady who's taking on Orange Man?
Just the lady spy.
Oh, okay. Well, she is white, so I can say that. Okay, so she's specializing in combating disinformation, right? That's all of her stuff. So her background is she was an aide for Senator August King, a Democrat.
Angus King.
Angus, sorry. August? August sounds more noble.
Angus just sounds like he's just a cattle rancher.
But yeah, he was a Democrat, member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, right? But not something that was noted before. But I do think there's something interesting going on with how many people will serve in or around intelligence committees, either as intelligence community staff or secondary staff. One of the things if you're ever in DC is how small groups we're talking about here. We're talking about like a dozen people to 20-something people, sometimes up to 50 people of staffers who are all part of the same congressional staff, who all relate to the committee staff, which is different. So you have the congressional staff, like she's working for a senator, and then you have the staff that's employed by the committee, which is oftentimes professional people, right, who are like lawyers and technical folks. And then you have like the group of them by party and by interest group areas, right? So she's serving with that. Her story is that she was on the campaign in 2016 for him and was like running his disinformation operations, right, to like identify that in 2018, and then after that she was like, oh, I should start my own group to do this for people to like consult
on a broader
this.
scale,
right. And to do it for the larger, solving the big issues, right? The big disinformation issues, because we know that 2016 was a stolen election by the Russians.
We
right?
know that. Yeah.
At least at the time, that was the best information we had. Okay, that's what the government told us to believe.
That is exactly what happened. I would never question that. I would never.
So what's interesting here is, and this is we're now exiting. Before we get it, we'll circle on. Actually, let's go into the motive first. Let's do this, and then let's make sure to circle back around to PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is what she did before she was with the Senate campaign, with the senator. Where we have this video about her talking about her motive for starting Alethea. It's linked right there on the top. We just got too many Twitter links going on.
I'm getting confused by all the links I have up here.
Yeah, sorry, buddy.
It's probably in here. I'm just gonna refresh that.
Yeah, just go down
right there.
I started Alethea Group in May of 2019, and the reason I started it was because of my experience as the digital director on a 2018 Senate campaign. And what was interesting was you have to remember, like, put it into context. I know we've been talking about these issues almost some days it feels like ad nauseum since the 2016 election. But in 2018, this was the first campaign since we really knew what was happening. And so in February of 2018, Robert Mueller's indictment of the Russians who interfered in the US election came out, and it was written in very plain language. It clearly was not, I don't think anybody was holding their breath waiting for the Kremlin to extradite these guys, but it laid out the playbook of what happened in 2016. And so we read that and we said to ourselves, okay, how are we going to know if this is happening? And once we figure it out, what are we actually going to do about it? And so we developed a strategy to be able to do things like proactively go out and look for instances of disinformation and create a resilient digital strategy so that we were able to spot any nefarious behavior quicker. And so that we were able to really build a strategy that was more resilient to being co-opted. And then from there, what we saw really, I think, just kept all of us up at night. We came to realize pretty quickly.
Kept us all up at night.
Yeah. So very interesting. Like, it's just, she's so convinced that 2016 was stolen. Right, that she had to start an entire new organization, right, and that I'm sure came out of nowhere. She was a digital director on a campaign, and I'm going to go solve this problem. She doesn't mention her boss was part of the intelligence committee that at the time was probably in the know, given what we know about how the Gang of Eight is supposed to work, that the Obama administration had asked, probably the CIA had asked, for the other 7 IA agencies to come up with this strange document called the Steele dossier.
Right? How you said we all know how the Gang of Eight is supposed to work. I'm not sure everybody actually knows that. How are they supposed
in
to
order
work?
to do intel ops, the president's supposed to say, hey, leadership in the Senate and the intelligence committees, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, right? They have like immediate access so that there's some kind of check. That's a church committee reform that happened after the revelations of the church committee. So Watergate happens. The church committee is formed to be like, what's going on with our intelligence agencies? They discover that the NSA exists. We didn't know that before then.
Whoa, look at this organization. Look what they're doing.
Yeah. MK Ultra, Project Mockingbird, all this stuff all comes out with the church committee. Some of it's sealed till later.
Cuckoo conspiracy nonsense.
Yeah, right.
I would never.
And then they say, well, here's some reforms from it. Those reforms get passed. Basically, it just makes the job a little bit tougher because now there's a potential, in theory, that either leadership in the House and Senate or the leadership of the intelligence committees would come out with something. Now, part of that is a good example of that, of where it did work, was Edward Snowden, when one of the leaders of that committee was questioning the head of the NSA at the time and got that person basically to lie.
Yeah. What was Brennan? No. Clapper. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyways, so you note that she doesn't mention the boss committee. Note that she does not mention what she did before she was in the Senate. She worked for a organization called PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC, which provides, quote, auditing and consulting and tax services, including significant engagements with government agencies like the Department of Defense and Homeland Security. Right? So why does the Department of Defense and Homeland Security need audit, tax, and consulting?
Yeah. Well, it just makes me think of when we were talking about Deloitte several weeks back, because like they are one of the biggest kind of auditing tax services
and you'll remember
in the world.
Who is Deloitte?
Well, Deloitte, they're a very old company, but they handle auditing, tax services, and all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But then you just do a little bit of digging and they started to hire a bunch of CIA intelligence guys, and they started to move into those circles and using that for like corporate espionage and things like that. And you're just like, well, there's just some interesting connections there. I mean, there's nothing that we can really like concrete know about stuff, but you're just like, well, that's odd.
And if you look at like Mike Benz, he's like, these guys are cut out, right? He's making the claim. And so PricewaterhouseCoopers is Deloitte, just larger, even bigger.
Wait, they're bigger?
Yeah, according to this, they're the top 2 of the top 4 of this particular industry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't realize they were that big.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so she was working for them, doing who God knows what, right? Then goes to work for a senator, right? Mm-hmm. And then goes to start this thing. Now, guess who was the first guy to invest in Alethea Group?
Who would that be?
Ted. I'm going to butcher his last name. Schlein? SCHL Schlein?
I don't know who that is. Who is that?
I'll underline it. Am I pronouncing that right, Kyle? Well,
Ted Schlein.
Yeah, Schlein. There we go. So we're just guessing that PricewaterhouseCoopers is that. We'll get back around to the woman assistant quote here in a minute. I think that's just interesting to get in our mind. But it is really important to note that the first person to jump on with Alethea is Ted Schlein. He's an investor in the group. He is on the board of the trustees of an organization called In-Q-Tel, which is literally the CIA's venture capital firm.
Yeah, this is, oh boy. World-class cutting-edge technologies for national security's IQT's missions. American not-for-profit venture capital firm based in Arlington, Virginia.
Yeah. Starting in 1998 to, quote, bridge the gap between the technology needs of the intelligence community and the innovative solutions emerging from the private sector.
It invests in companies to keep the Central Intelligence Agency and other intelligence agencies equipped with the latest information technology to support the United States intelligence capabilities.
Oh, additionally, that there's reports that say that in cybersecurity, biotechnology, and data analytics that they invest in.
Wait.
Why is the CIA investing in biotechnology?
So the Q in In-Q-Tel is actually an intentional reference to the inventor who supplies technology to James Bond.
Oh, yeah. That was QAnon.
In-Q-Tel.
Got it.
Q.
Yo. All right, so I think it's really important. So one of the things there is you can't get Ted Schlein on the line, right? Right, because he's literally a spy. But you do have her. You do have Lisa. So let's dive into some comments that she says about how she thinks of the mis and disinformation campaign that she's supposedly running with this organization.
How many options they actually have. So for example, if you're able to detect what a lot of people are doing right now is they're analyzing something once it's already gotten onto Twitter, onto Facebook, onto YouTube, for example, and it's on one of these mainstream platforms, and they call the social media platforms and they say, please take it down. Yeah. That's one option. But if you've gotten to that point, in a lot of ways, it may already be too late. So what we do is we practice early detection. So we catch narratives when they start, and we're able to then track them and understand how they may be influencing individuals and seeking to change individuals' behavior. We analyze on the network level. And what that does is it enables us to take more options. So for example, let's take these for-profit disinformation networks. Well, if they're making a profit off of a potential organization, there could be an opportunity to seek damages. If they're misappropriating intellectual property, such as your name, your likeness, trademarkable or patentable or copyrighted material, there are legal options that organizations can take to seek recourse. If there is an opportunity to do counter messaging, and I'm not talking about fact checking. In our experience, fact checking, while it's helpful in creating a paper of record or it's helpful in giving something to point to set the story straight, it's not sufficient. And here's why. The people who are choosing to believe a narrative aren't necessarily going to believe something, salacious about you. It's change their mind and say they no longer believe something that's totally salacious about you and confirms their biases about you just because you're the one that said it isn't true. So we're talking about really counter narrative building. And that can be done in an ethical way by creating a greater understanding around an individual or an organization.
So the narrative building means that you have to have an alternative narrative that you want to drive. Who decides what that narrative is, Kyle?
Who decides? They.
Right?
It's the interests, the interests of this, the blob, right? Or whatever you want to call that blob.
Or at least Lisa. Mm-hmm. Or the Twitter employee that decides who's gonna be in, who's gonna be out. And once again, a great example, the best example, the one that we know is clearly, not just because it suits our books, but because it's very clear going one direction, not the other, is what happened with the election. Was 2016 stolen or not, Lisa? Because you say it's a motive for you starting this organization about all the Russian bots, and then you joined Twitter and then recommended all these particular people who are all on the other side of the political aisle from you when you worked for a Democrat to get their accounts banned in a narrative that, just so happens to benefit Democrats. And it just so happens to benefit Democrats to criticize Donald Trump for being a Russian asset and then also not to publish the Biden laptop story. Like these sets of coincidences, events, and their all connections to the intelligence agencies suggest to me that there is something going on here that isn't just, as they like to put that, they're just trying to stop the Russian bots from controlling our elections. It's bullshit.
Well, it is because, hypothetically, I probably got swept up in the trying to find the narrative before it happens that she's talking about here when I got banned across everything, right? I would assume that's what happened because during the 2020 election, there was just blanket sweeps of bannings that happened. And you're probably getting filtered for this is probably a Russian bot or whatever it is, right? And you're probably getting filtered into that, whatever the algorithm is kind of, the data is pointing to in their eyes because they're looking for very specific justifications to hit. So if there's particular narratives that are forming that are something as they would think a Russian bot would say, which is talking about the Hunter Biden laptop story when you're not allowed to talk about it, talking about COVID in ways that you're not supposed to talk about, all these things that just kind of happen to just fit into their ethos. If you're not talking about things in their particular light, then that's probably where the blanket sweep started happening because you're part of the narrative formation that's going in the wrong direction. Right.
And that's the subtle trick of the moment, right? Is I say mis and disinformation information, it's very clear that there is real mis and disinformation out there. And then what I do is I do narrative management. Right. And that narrative management.
Narrative management is such a good term. Right.
And then if you really like it, then you zoom it out even further. So like, oh, it's not mis and disinformation. It's cognitive warfare. Right. And you even abstract it even more. So then your censorship is no longer clearly, censorship.
And I think that is the correct term, is cognitive warfare, because that is what's happening. Like it is narrative wars. Like it is, there are people weaving sophistry to get towards certain ends and all this stuff. But but it's just, but like everybody kind of has like some sort of ends that they're moving towards. And this is just, they have a massive power operation that allows them to be a super effective versus kind of the more decentralized cognitive war army that exists on the in the social media sphere, right?
Sure. I mean, like it's we all know people have interest, right? No one's surprised by that. The founders knew that, right? They called it faction, right? So the whole idea was that if you make things peaceful and you allow people to articulate the truth as they see it and navigate the truth, that you will go through that forging fire of discovering and persuasion, right? But they don't see it that way. The way they see cognitive warfare is there are people who are bad actors who want to manipulate the general public, and they're going to protect the general public from those bad actors. But how they use it is against their own civilians, their own population, who have ideas they don't like. And that's who the actual cognitive warfare is done against. It's not Russia. It's you.
Well, it's because they have to defend democracy, because democracy is the great thing that they have to, because that's how you protect freedom.
And democracy, as defined, is neoliberalism.
Yeah, no, like I'm just saying, like those are the words. Like they're defending the religious principles in like that they have on these.
Their magic spells, the things that they kind of wield as a clutch, as a rationale.
But in order to do that, they must preserve power. They need to preserve their kind of control over the system, because they are the defenders of the mythos that kind of binds civilization together. Like that's how they view it, right?
Yeah, right. That's why you can't have Bolsonaro do this thing. That's why you can't have Donald Trump in office, right? Because they undermine the fundamental civic religion by being crude and by being not having the right narrative, or not reinforcing
or just the general kind of global egalitarian principle that they're trying to sit in place on things. Like when you have nationalist movements popping up in Ireland, El Salvador, Brazil, name it, any of these places. Italy is going through this type of stuff. Slovakia, like all these places. That is a problem for the kind of global, it's always be like the globalists, but like that's the goal. It's to expand the hegemony over and exert control and try to equalize everything together. Like that seems to be the goal.
Yeah, right? I mean, if you conceptualize it, if you try to de-religify it, and you hear globalist, and you're not thinking of Alex Jones, you're not thinking of Steve Bannon, Trump, stuff like that. You really just think of the way that NATO layers on top of an American foreign policy establishment view that is very consistent with a very long-term expansionist policy, and that's how we got there with Russia. And you take those same set of principles of like that layering issue, that layering phenomena, I guess is probably the better way to say it, and you just put that out of foreign policy and into culture and into markets and into all these other, and if you layer that with what we know about intelligence agencies operations across Central and South America, across from the 40s to today, their operations on behalf of corporations and entities of these sorts. Why wouldn't you, right? There's so clearly a global effort to drive these things for the benefit of a very small group of people, a relatively small group of people. If you look at like Guatemala and United Fruit, or El Salvador and United Fruit, or many other organizations that have done terrible things on behalf of American non-government organizations, you wouldn't therefore just, it's once you get into all that, you start looking at that problem, it's hard to then conclude, oh yeah, there's no effort here to drive a very specific global narrative on behalf of a very specific globalized vision that, and I'm not the guy worried about like the UN taking over the sovereignty of America, but I am very concerned about this use of America as a global government rather than one that's focused on its constitutional duties to protect the rights and civil liberties of Americans, right? That seems to me to be a very clear, grounded in fact reality, right? It's not fear mongering. It's not worried about is Sharia law being imposed on America, right? Or a lot of things that conservatives can get kind of bound up in and distracted by, or maybe have legitimate concerns about, but they're just remote concerns. This is like a tangible, right now, in your face, have direct information and facts about sort of concern. Okay. All right. So InQtel, all right, returning back to those guys. Venture capital firm started in 1999 without any act of Congress. Now get this. I can't emphasize this enough when talking about this issue. And we do talk about this a lot on the podcast, but because it's kind of become part of our brand, right? Fighting the mono narrative. You can't do that without talking about the Twitter files, right?
It's such a critical piece of everything.
Yeah. But the fact that the CIA can create a nonprofit firm with your tax dollars, or maybe without your tax dollars, is even worse. What's worse? The CIA can create a venture capital firm that can like buy technologies and companies and run them on behalf of the CIA with your tax dollars, or that they can do that with drug dollars.
Yeah. I was gonna say, where are the other dollars coming from? Oh yeah, probably like opium wars and like.
Is that worse? And then what words would you use to describe a CIA that can do that? Is that a global cabal?
Well,
right? Are they constrained by national boundaries? No. They're based in San Francisco, but so what? Like, are they constrained by U.S. law?
Yeah.
Like the rest of us are?
They're beyond the law. Like it's better to think of these organizations, and it's not necessarily like the CIA. It's like groups within the CIA that are kind of conducting things, right? Like it's not like I don't like, because the CIA is a very broad brush. Like it's just like there's like factions in here that are just operating and kind of going rogue and doing their own means. It seems like
very possible.
Yeah, that seems to be what the case is.
At least for what we know about InQtel, is it's a formal CIA process that I don't understand. One of the things, I ran out of time before I could do this. I really need to do some further background work on InQtel about exactly how do we know about this, right? Why isn't it like Deloitte or one of the other ones that it's like, it could be not, you know what I mean? Like why, how do we know that?
Here's just like an interesting factoid. Like I'm just on the Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
InQtel sold 5,636 shares to Google worth over $2.2 million in 2005. The shares were a result of Google's acquisition of Keyhole Inc., the CIA-funded satellite mapping software now known as Google Earth.
Everything's an op.
Well, because we talked about the Google CIA connection months and months ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, there's just kind of a fun factoid there.
It's really, what it does is it muddies the water about what is real capitalism and what isn't, right? What is real innovation and what is driven by these government services, because they're so all pervasive. And it gives people an idea that these are necessary functions of the system when they're not.
Development of various VPNs, there's a bunch of stuff in here that's probably worth just perusing.
Yeah.
Just
goddamn. All right. So the next
all
one,
sorts of search engine stuff here. Yes.
So the next person to get into, because I think they kind of are the last linchpin as far as for people, is Peter Mudge Zetko. So Mudge is like his hacker name. He's Hacker Man. He's a hacker man.
The hacker 4chan.
He's a renowned cybersecurity expert who joined Twitter as head of security at a very interesting date, Kyle. October of 2020.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like right before the election. That's when I got banned.
He's the guy who did it.
Hey, Mr. Mudge.
He was the main force within Twitter to advocate for that brought in Alethea as a contracting company, according to the Twitter files. There's some evidence that he was/is an intellectual intel community asset going way back. For all kinds of reasons. It dives into it in detail. That's not really important here. But an email revealed that he had engaged with members of the U.S. intelligence agencies and sought to establish a formal agreement allowing him to work with and provide information to intelligence agencies while he was employed at Twitter. Right. So it's another one of those, like, it got revealed to the public in an email, in a released email exchange even before Elon bought it, that he might have been involved in this way, at least to the board. Now, Zacco is often talked about as a whistleblower. Like you look him up, his main coverage you'll find is that he did a whistleblowing on Twitter. Now, this is now exiting Twitter files and going into something I noticed.
Yeah, and he blew the whistle on them having bad security practices.
Yes, and that executives misled government about these issues. He did this in April. This was done in April of 2020, after Elon Musk expressed his desire to buy Twitter in March. I don't know what this means, but it's a very interesting time. So think about this. Like this Zacco guy goes back with his work, and you can find like stuff going all the way back to the early 90s of him, like say, as a government consult for security practices for spies and stuff. He goes to Twitter right at the right time, right? October of 2020, right? As a security analyst, and then advocates for Alethea, and then says once Twitter's on its decline, it's a great decline after banning everybody who wasn't a liberal or didn't keep their head down.
Well, yeah, and it's actually I want to be more specific. It's not just like a tool for the Democrats. Like that is not necessarily the proper way. Yeah, that is. It's much more like, because there were plenty of people on the left that also were getting banned. Mm-hmm. It's just like it's the ones that weren't kind of part of the neoliberal order. Like they're not the Joe Biden, the Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton acolytes. They're like the anti-war
Democracy Now types.
Yeah, those types of people were also getting banned. It's just like there's more people on the quote unquote right than the left that are kind of in that camp. Mm-hmm. But so like it's very easy to hyper focus on that, but it's not just only right-wing people were getting banned. Like, correct. That's not necessarily the way to look at it.
So this guy, after that, 2 years go by. At the end of those 2 years, Elon Musk says, "Hey, I want to buy Twitter." And then a few months later, he goes to the government and whistleblows and says Twitter has all these problems. What reason would he have to do that? Perhaps to discourage Elon from buying it. Who knows? But it's a thing to speculate about. We have to speculate because it's all spy shit. Okay. So one more thing I think is interesting to this, and we've been on this for a minute. We don't have the clock up, but why would they want to get involved with organizations like PayPal and Amazon? Now, this is an interesting component of it because it kind of comes out of left field, but Alethea very specifically drives this to Twitter to be, quote, holistic. Did the link not work again? Damn it. Okay, so the link is less important, but there is a section of this that's very specifically about Alethea pushing Twitter to create partnerships with Amazon, PayPal, and other web services, specifically around domain hosting. Now, keep in mind what happened around this time. Mm-hmm. Who got banned? What was the social media network? No, what was the social media network that got
Parler?
Yeah, it got taken off of
Parler,
Google Play and things like that.
Apple, the Apple Store, Google Play got kicked off everything basically because it wasn't hitting specific terms of service. That's the way that they would define it, and that's how they restricted it, right?
Mm-hmm. And it went to like Amazon Web Cloud Services and all these other things that would refuse to host for those. So around this same time, Alethea is saying, no, we need a quote holistic response in the model of the EU to keep dangerous things from happening in speech. And so they decided, and this is kind of the model they suggested to build, right? And I'm trying to sketch this picture out because once again, these are us. We're Charlie on the whiteboard here, trying to connect some dots, not because just because we hate the government, which we do, but that's not it. Because we're trying to tell the truth about what we're seeing, and we can't have all the information because the government hides it, right, and makes it illegal to see, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it obfuscates it through like all these organizations. Like these third-party organizations are very important because one, it's very complicated to kind of weave the web and follow the money of all these things.
Right.
But it is kind of, there's like an outsourcing gig that is kind of happening here too.
Yes. And that's what makes it so hard, right? Because you look at Twitter, you say it's a private company, it has terms of service, and we had all these debates back then where we were like, at the time we were saying, okay, why is Twitter doing this? They seem like they're going way beyond their own terms of service, right? Right. And so some people were back then were saying the government's doing it, and we were like, well, maybe, but we don't have any information.
I got no. Well, I mean, the information was there because like we knew about FBI involvement in places like Meta formerly Facebook, going back like way to like 2015, 2014.
You're talking
These
like
things
the Ben
existed.
Swan thing where he was like went through all the LinkedIn pages
like,
and just said these people formerly.
Well, I also just remember, like, I remember when Facebook was talking about things like their trustworthiness score, and there was like FBI involvement in that, and the trustworthiness score was essentially a social credit score on the platform that gives every single person like a scoring, and that affects the algorithm on them. Like these things have existed, and also like there had been times where FBI agents or CIA agents were involved in, and we knew this, were involved in like manipulating the algorithms in foreign countries to try to move things towards certain political ends. Like these pieces had been there before. You know?
At the time, I don't remember anyone ever making that former case. Right?
I did.
The first time I remember the first time I've heard the Arab Spring argument, for example, things like that from Mike Benz was last year, right? That there was direct evidence that we have of that, of someone who is in the know saying, no, I know this, right? Whistleblower information to Congress about the actions of the intel community to do certain things overseas like that. That's when the Republicans took the House, right? It didn't happen before then.
No, I think it's just I think that there was just a keyhole thing that happened where people just weren't talking about this, but like there were in major publications like things that would be where you and it never just blew up, right? Like no, so the average person, even just like the average person with a lot of political knowledge, didn't necessarily pay attention to this unless you like were watching very specific things. Yeah. And then if you talked about those very specific things where people are like, like it just becomes that thing because there's a specific keyhole.
Yeah, maybe a way to explain it is to circle the other direction, right? If the government created a social media network, we'd all be like, oh, well, the government's going to design the social media network for the benefit of the government, right? But then when you say, oh, but the government isn't going to do that, right? Because the government sucks at creating websites, right? We all experienced Obamacare. Mm-hmm. But what it's going to do is it's going to use its intelligence apparatus to co-opt private existing owners of websites to then drive a very specific government narrative. Now, that is what seems to be what's happened. But in order to do that, in the pursuit of that, outside groups the process they were trying to set up, it appears to be, is that outside groups like Alethea would ID people to censor, probably intelligence assets or otherwise aligned. Mm-hmm. They would then go to Twitter, who would then approve the censorship because they're the ultimate owner of the means of doing it, right? And then from there, their holistic approach in Twitter's partnership with PayPal and Amazon Web Services and ISPs is one of them, right? They're going to like AT&T and stuff like that. To the holistic approach is to ban their ability to internet altogether, to do things on the internet. That was the end goal if you're connecting the dots. And I mean that with the highest sense of what we know based upon their own words in these documents and what we're seeing from their presentations, which are all linked on Schellenberger's Substack.
Yeah, and because I just kind of want to like put a bow on a certain point. Like we now have guys like Schellenberger that are doing like the deep, rigorous research. People like Mike Benz too, like they're doing the deep, rigorous research that's now kind of allowing people to see this more clearly. It's just it was always frustrating to me, especially when I got banned in 2020, of having to argue with libertarians about how private companies can do whatever they want when these signs were clearly there if you just looked at it. These signs of intelligence community involvement in these companies was very obvious at that point. It's just now there's like people like Schellenberger that are blowing it up on a massive level, right? Like that's where my frustrations with like kind of libertarians on this issue back in the day were.
Sure, and I think there's a couple different things. Some of it's normalcy bias, right? There's just an error of normalcy bias, right? If you said they're suppressing the lab leak theory, like to me, I was like, of course they are.
Yeah, but
it's very obvious they are because I'm paying attention. But then if you talk to somebody who wasn't paying attention, they'll be like, why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, a lot of my frustrations were like people that are actively involved in politics should have a better head on their shoulders about this stuff. Yeah, well, like that's the frustrating thing.
There's normalcy bias, and then there's also the strength of the evidence, right? We have much stronger evidence now, a body of evidence now than we used to. And so to me, some of the folks are just like they don't want to invest in something that they're not sure about yet. But what I'm trying to say is now you can be sure, right? Like, I'm the guy who's usually very slow to like change my mind about things without a solid set of evidence or good arguments, so arguments that satisfy what I feel like is a relatively high epistemological standard, right, of reason and evidence. And with this, we're there now on the government's efforts to try to control social media, specifically on behalf of a neoliberal international single hegemonic world order of America. But yeah, so I think that's a thing, right? And what it is, you can shorten that down to globalism if you want, but you lose a little bit of that resolution. So trying to keep the resolution high, there's something going on there, and it's huge. And we need to keep looking at it for that reason.
Well, and there's another thing, because like we're looking at a lot of these third-party elements, there's a bigger web too. You also have things just like grant funding going into research at universities. Mm-hmm. Like that's where a lot of the data analysis is coming from. It's just like they're just straight up giving university research team stuff to be able to analyze all of this, and then that feeds into the think tanks that then are be like, oh hey Twitter, here's or hey Facebook, here's all the information that we got. You should do something about it, right? So like you have this web that happens, but where do those grants come from? They come from like DARPA funding, right? Yeah, and there's like it's just a big trail that happens, right?
Right. So and I just want to do this to do our journalistic integrity, which is from Lisa Kaplan herself, responding for a quote from Public, said, quote, "I have never and would never ask social media platform to censor.
Never.
I have flagged inauthentic coordinated behavior, or what current ex-owner Elon Musk refers to as, quote, the spam bots, end quote, which he seeks to, quote, defeat, end quote, as they violate the terms of service for his and other platforms, as well as threats of violence against individuals. I have not urged social media companies to censor, and that allegation is categorically false." So this is, once again, relying on the very tricky language of what is censorship, when is it censorship, and when is it cognitive warfare?
Yeah, and that's just like bullshit PR stuff, right? that's all that is.
Well, I mean, one of the things that is clever about this is everyone does hate the bots, right? I'm really tired of going through Twitter and seeing like this bot shit. Like it drives me crazy.
The bots are crazy.
And it's only going to get worse. It's going to be harder to detect too with more AI gets sophisticated. But if she was just doing bots, what happened? It's like, where did you fuck up in a major way, Lisa, if you're just doing bots? Okay. Because you done did.
I wasn't a bot, Lisa. I actually do think there, if you're a user that uses VPNs, I think that is something that gets flagged in like bot stuff often too. Like it's very easy to kind of get caught up and be seen as a bot by the system if you're somebody that bounces IPs quite a bit. That is something that I have noticed.
So what are you talking about, man? I just live in Arizona.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just like in Ireland and Portugal all the time.
All right. So that's the end of that one.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's ZESTYBEV.com.
Crypto week in Congress.
Yeah, so it was a big week in my world on the crypto space, but so there's actually three major things that happened this week in crypto. 2 bills got passed in the House, and then also so we'll start off just high level here is the House passed a bill to outline crypto regulatory reform, and I'll dig into that, and I got some video from the House floor on that. And then there was a House bill passed to ban CBDCs, which is pretty crazy to see. And then Ethereum spot ETFs happened, which is something that I said on the podcast was going to happen back in January. I said it was going to happen in May. Apparently, everyone was like, nobody saw this coming till 2 days ago. I was like, I don't know. I said this in January.
See, that's why you listen to Human Interaction Podcast. To get all your best crypto news, this is not financial
financial advice. Do your own research, etc. Yada, yada, yada.
So wait, let's be sure to go around and define what a spot ETF is, just for.
Okay, yeah. So it's basically just you're taking shares in somebody else's fund of a certain asset. So like if you go onto like a brokerage account like TD Ameritrade or something like that, and you're going to and you're going to buy gold. You're buying a gold ETF. Like you're not actually buying the physical gold. You're buying you're buying shares of somebody's like pool of gold. And that's what you can do back in January. That became a thing with Bitcoin. Pretty much all these major brokers all are now doing Bitcoin shares.
Buying shares. Wait a minute. What level of abstraction are we at? Right. Okay. Hold on a second. You're buying a non-buy, non-physical asset that is already a non-physical asset.
Like
right?
I like. Not financial advice, but that's always a good thing to put on recording. Not financial advice, but when it comes to crypto, unless you're like a corporate entity or something like that, that's like just or you're looking for very specific tax advantages,
right?
Or you're putting it into like your Roth IRA or something like that,
right?
Buying an ETF rather than just buying the actual coin in crypto, you're losing all the value that you have of having the crypto, especially actually even more so with Ethereum. Because like Bitcoin, you can kind of just hold and you can buy, sell and stuff like that. Like it's very hard.
Yeah.
It doesn't have all this extra.
You can stake Ethereum.
Yeah. Like Ethereum, like all of my Ethereum, I have staked.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And you're getting an APY on it because you're contributing to the verification of the network and all this stuff. You can't do that with an ETF.
Define APY real quick, just for
what is it actually?
Annual
per yield or something like that.
Yeah. It's
basically
like an interest rate.
Yeah, the way Ethereum works is it is a proof of stake model, and you stake Ethereum in the network, and that is part of the validation process of the network that kind of keeps it rolling. So people will stake, and this is how actually most cryptocurrencies work. So people stake, and then as part of your rewards, this is essentially the mining of Ethereum, like in the way that Bitcoin miners are, but this is a different way of it working. And then you just get a yield off of the rewards for everybody that's staking. You can't do that with an ETF. So it's like, It's one of those things where you're actually missing a lot of the value of it.
Additionally, isn't that exactly what happens at custodial exchanges? They get hacked. They have all these things, all this Bitcoin or Ethereum, whatever, and it gets transferred out of their wallets because you don't actually control the actual asset in this place. You're paying someone else to control the asset.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's like the number one lesson. If you're an older school crypto guy, never let someone else control your crypto. The whole point is that you can control it. So you're responsible for it, so you can secure it. And so it's a digital asset online that's actually secure. That's the whole point. We could have always have just made a peer-to-peer money, right? But it's the crypto part of it. It's the cryptography of it that secures it, that actually makes it competitive against other kinds of money, because it isn't as hackable due to peer-to-peer blockchain technology and cryptography.
Yeah, and it's one of these things, like if you're only looking for just exposure for your portfolio, then the ETF it might be for you, because like there's going to be certain tax advantages that come with it.
Sure.
Right? It's just, but if you're looking for anything beyond just number go up or down, like especially with Ethereum, because Ethereum is so useful in everything. Like so many things are built on top of it. There's all this stuff you can do with Ethereum. I'm not going to get into it. Like most of my life is on Ethereum. So like, this is nice for my bags, but like I would never actually buy the ETF, right? Like that's that. So yeah, but it's one of those things where, I think there's certain questions here about the ETF, and also just these crypto bills in general here is there's kind of signaling from the Joe Biden administration of like the crypto lobby seems to be actually becoming important in this election, because 20% of people in America own crypto.
Wow. It's higher than I think it would be.
Yeah, I saw a survey. That actually came from Coinbase's survey.
Really?
Yeah, Coinbase did a survey on that. I saw something last week that said that more people own crypto than dogs. in America.
That's hard to believe.
Yeah, I don't know how true that is. I don't know how true that is, but
one other thing, actually, just to make sure, and especially if we have any new listeners, CBDC, what is that?
Well, we'll get into that, Bill.
Okay.
We'll take each of these one at a time.
One at a time.
You actually have me going in reverse order right now from what I planned. Right. But so there is kind of this signaling that seems to be coming from the Biden administration that is just like they're a little bit worried about the crypto lobby because over the past 2 years, and there's a massive wave. Like if you're on crypto Twitter, as we call it, pretty much everybody's like, you got to vote for Trump at this point. That's pretty much where everybody is right now. So like they're kind of like,
I see. So they're trying to cultivate the crypto crowd, which is a big part of it.
Which is also a lot of new money too, right?
And then Trump is now accepting crypto donations on his website, right?
Yeah, and I'll actually just pull that link up right here, which is just funny.
It is hilarious.
It is pretty funny to see this. Oh
no!
Oh, this was my image of it. Something's wrong with my image of it. But
okay.
But it's just
I was going to say they're no longer accepting.
No, that was an image.
Are they accepting the best coin? The best.
There was like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, what you would expect, USDC, which is a stable coin. But they also are accepting like Dogecoin and Shiba Inu, which is funny. But also like you can trade those on Ethereum. Sure. So like any coin that uses an Ethereum address, you can just send. So like they could send whatever.
Really anything.
Yeah, you could send if you wanted to send to Trump, you could send
Trump coin.
Or Obama Sonic Enu Harry Potter coin if you wanted to, right? Anything that's on Ethereum you could send. Or on Solana.
So what's this bill, the regulatory bill?
So what we have here is it's called Fit 21, and it outlines a regulatory framework for the industry, which is something that the industry's kind of been begging for because there's a lot of corporate entities in particular. They're like, we're afraid to get into crypto because there's so much we don't know, and we don't know how the government's going to handle it. And this is probably going to open up of like, oh, okay, this is safe now. Like,
will I be able to buy a TV on Overstock.com again?
I probably.
Okay. That was like a sad day for me when they quit accepting cryptocurrency on Overstock. Bummer.
Yeah, but so the bill passed 279 to 136. There was actually 71 Democrats that crossed over on this, and pretty much every Republican. There, besides no votes, there was no nays on the Republican side. On this.
Really?
Yeah. So it was Republicans and then 71 Democrats.
Yeah, I would think at least like the Intel Republicans would vote against it.
There was like 4 no votes on the Republicans, so maybe that says something. I'm not sure. An interesting thing on that is on the Democrats that voted yay versus nay. There's a massive average age gap. There's like a difference of like 15 years in age.
Really? So young Democrats.
Voted for.
Classic.
Old Democrats voted against.
Classic. And it's probably. I'm going to just guess this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Just going on my stereotypes of Democrats. Young people are probably like, this is money for the people because young people can buy into it and ride the inflation waves.
Even black people can do like that's the way that
they don't know what a computer is, according to the Democrat mayor of New York or whatever it was. Oh God. And then the older folks are like, oh no, this is a scam by these wealthy white people from San Bernardino.
Yeah, right? I want to get into the speech that Representative Brad Sherman gave on the floor because it is juicy.
Oh, let's do it.
But just before we do that, the major features of this bill is it kind of categorizes what gets put under the CFTC versus the SEC. So as of right now, I believe before this bill, it was just kind of Bitcoin was in the CFTC category and everything else was kind of under the SEC.
Yeah, define those two. What are those two different committees?
CFTC basically handles commodities. So it's like, and then SEC handles securities. So there's a question of what in the crypto space is a commodity versus a security. That's kind of...
And for non-financial people, commodity things like gold. Security is the things like stocks.
Stocks and things like that. So, and so they put it under category if the blockchain is functional but decentralized, that is that is essentially under the CFTC. If it's functional... Wait, did I say functional but decentralized? It's CFTC.
Yeah.
And functional but not decentralized, then it's SEC.
So why these are very strange. Like I get it from the crypto angle. That's why is functional like
Functional is a word that is in there.
Unfunctional, but decentralized. Where's that go? Why even have functional? In
This is perhaps for the anarchist crowd in the crypto space. This is probably, which I might have imbibed with.
Yeah, my people.
This is the thing is it is kind of saying that you have to register if you are running a blockchain or you're building a blockchain. You kind of got to register as a category in this, right?
Yes.
And so like there becomes this like if you want to be functioning. And you have to be functioning. So if you're an unfunctioning blockchain, whatever that means,
that's what I was going to say.
Then you shouldn't operate in America that's probably because it's unsafe and all this stuff.
Right.
You don't want to do all this, right? But
decentralized but unfunctioning.
Yeah.
Then they just register as an unfunctioning website. Then you don't have to report to anybody, right?
Well, and then but then that's probably going to be if you are a legally like law-abiding exchange operating within the United States, this probably
means you were not
filters who you can, which coins you can.
That makes sense.
Like if you're Coinbase, this is going to be the determining factor.
Oh, man.
Of what goes under there, right? But this also probably puts like things like Ethereum are going to be shifted towards the CFTC because this is always the question: is like, is Gary Gensler going to say that it's a security or not? Like that has always become the big thing, right?
And this is a better role for Congress is to create actual definitions. So you don't have someone like Gary Gensler deciding what things are and creating laws himself because he's not elected by anybody. He's an appointed person. Yeah,
and one of the best champions for this has been Cynthia Loomis, senator of Wyoming. She's been probably one of the best champions here. She keeps tweeting about how we're going to build a crypto army, and because Elizabeth Warren is saying we're going to build an anti-crypto army. So there's armies forming, right?
All these cat fights, I love it.
Yeah, but so here's in regards to the first bill outlining the regulatory framework. I have Brad Sherman, who is just he's a lovable man. Let me pull this here. Okay.
We're going to go full circle and we have like some crypto owner fighting congressmen or threatening to fight congressman committee.
Well, and that's the thing is, especially as more young people become entered into Congress, like that's going to shift. It's becoming much more of a natural thing, right? It's like, and it's like, you don't have to be as like crypto native as me. It's just like a lot of people, last cycle, there's like, I'm going to try this Dogecoin thing, or I'm going to try like, what is this Bitcoin thing all about? Like, there's just people that have kind of like cursory been building their knowledge.
Or and they have a Webull account or a Robinhood account, and they just see it along all these other stocks, and they're like, hey, I'm going to buy this, right? Or
what's all the hype about? Like, there are people that are just curious, right? And that's just going to continue to grow over time. Mm-hmm. What is a pudgy penguin? Okay, so here's Brad Sherman.
Last week, we had Police Week. This week, the Republicans show us that they support crime in the suites. The effect of this bill short term will be to disempower the most effective investor protection crime investigation organization in the world, the SEC. But the long-term objective of the crypto billionaire bros is to create a new currency, and they've named it well. Cryptocurrency literally means hidden money. And if it ever becomes a currency, it means that we will not be able to enforce our tax laws except on wage earners. And we will not be able to enforce our laws against child and traffickers, drug dealers, and those who violate our sanctions. Now,
so we won't be able to enforce our laws.
Has this guy ever heard of cash before?
Brad Sherman has been one of the most anti-crypto people in Congress. It's him and Elizabeth Warren.
Wow.
But we won't be able to enforce our laws. I don't know. It sounds like a benefit.
Wait. Are you telling me you won't be able to spy on me anymore or regulate everything I do?
It is kind of a sovereign individual take, like the book, The Sovereign Individual, where it's just like, the new technologies are making it harder for the nation states to operate. And he's kind of just like saying that outright. Like that's instantly what I thought about.
Oh, yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. And it is definitely from where you would need it to be, right? To create a compelling audience is to say, well, we're going to have anarchy in the streets if people aren't taxed, to the degree that we think they should, and all this stuff. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. So here I'll skip ahead to another part that I found interesting from this speech.
Now, this bill would be bad enough if we were dealing with the original statute. And I know a lot of my colleagues have had meetings in their offices and they were told about this bill weeks ago, months ago. Some are leaning toward voting for it because they don't know that they dropped a new title in the bill just a few weeks ago. What does that new title do? Does it prohibit secret wallets, self-custody wallets? No.
Oh, you can't have that.
Does it outlaw the mixers that have as their sole purpose to mix up law enforcement? No. What does this new title do? It defines a investment contract in a new way, designed to make this bill not just applicable to crypto, but it says our regular stocks and bonds can be put on blockchain and have no regulation from the SEC. It is a dagger at the $100 trillion capital markets that we have that finance our whole economy. It
He just revealed it right there.
Yeah.
Wow.
And also
Just drops the mask right there. Just like it'll compete with trillions of dollars of established capital. You can't have that.
Well, and also because he's all in a sense, he's actually kind of making an argument as like we're moving towards a thing where everything's just going to be tokenized on the blockchains, like even like our stocks and everything. Like that's going to be how we verify that stuff. And it's like we can't have that.
You can't have change, innovation. Wow.
Which is actually what somebody that a lot of people don't like, but that's actually what Larry Fink has said in the last year is that everything is going to become tokenized.
Right.
Like that's where he sees the direction.
We've
of all
been
this
saying that in the
heading.
crypto space for 10 years.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean,
it's just Larry Fink's just kind of caught up to us, right?
Right. About time, Larry. Oh man, that's awesome.
But
just dropping the hat on the whole thing.
Yeah, and there's the last part that I want to see from this because I think it's interesting to seeing where the anti side is right now on this. It's very telling.
So boomer.
And then finally, crypto declares that it wants to partially displace the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. If it's successful in that,
Yield 30 additional seconds.
The gentleman's recognized.
You have
for 30
to understand
seconds.
how important it is. We, frankly, are not fiscally responsible in this house. We don't collect near as much taxes as we spend in benefits. We're able to do that without too much harm because of the role of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. We have fiscal policies that would make Argentina blush, but we're able to do it. The crypto bros see the incredible amount of money and power the U.S. government has by being the world's reserve currency, and they say no, they want to appropriate them from themselves. I yield back.
I thought you would love that.
He's like, we're terrible. We can't manage anything. We are the worst at our basics of our fiscal house. So you can't let them compete with us.
He was like, look, we're not the most financially responsible here, and we've been extracting the value of the dollar for a century. But the crypto bros want to do that too, and we can't have that.
Oh, man. And what he means by the crypto bro, he means anyone who buys into this and sees the vision and doesn't like the fact that they are reducing the value of your currency and stealing it from you via inflation. Oh man, that is so great. I've never seen that. The mask was just slipping the whole time. At the very end, he's just taking it all off. It's like, we can't have. Oh man, that's like back in like 2008, and you're hearing about crypto for the first time. You're like, it could replace the U.S. dollar, and we're dreaming these crypto anarchic dreams,
these cyber monies. Oh my god,
we're thinking about it way back then, and we're like, that's so far off. It's just not possible. It's gonna 100 years from now, maybe. And then to see this guy, but they'll compete with the dollar on the congressional floor with what's that? Is that
Maxine Waters was back there?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Is that McCarthy? No,
I don't think so.
But just in Congress, this guy be like, you can't let them do that. We're irresponsible. We can't compete.
Well, and actually, because Maxine Waters was in that too, and I have a quote from her. This is a bill where the crypto companies decide they didn't like the SEC. They did not want to be regulated, and they were going to come to Congress of the United States, and they were going to use their power, and they were going to use their employees to change the rules of the game.
Use their power. You have nukes, lady. All they have is speech. All they can say is like, hey, can you listen to me about this thing that we're trying to build? Oh man, but it really goes to show you just like to what degree the entire system is based upon force and their monopoly of force. Right? It has nothing to do with how good of a product the dollar is. It has everything to do with how they can use power to try to prevent any competition of the dollar and therefore keep you as a tax slave and cattle. Oh God, that's so funny. All right, so central bank digital currencies.
So then there was a bill yesterday banning CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. And reminder, both of these are in the House. Like they just passed the House. They still have to go through more process. These things aren't actually written into law yet.
Right.
All of that stuff. So just be warned that we're not kind of over the hill yet. But so the TLDR on the central bank digital currency bill is it bans the Fed from being able to issue a central bank digital currency. Interestingly, it also bans the Fed from allowing third-party contractors to do it.
Attaboy.
Because the bill originally in its previous design, and it allowed for them to hire commercial banks to just do it instead, which actually kind of is funny coming off our previous conversation about how like the CIA uses all these third-party contractors to do all these things, and you just like think about it, it's like, hey, good provision there.
Yeah,
let's just not let them do that.
Conservatives are slowly starting to learn a little bit how power works. Good job.
But Rep. Patrick McHenry, who has been a pretty good champion on the crypto stuff on the Republican side, he has a clip here of him kind of explaining the ins and outs of that. So let's give that a listen.
And it's really interesting, too, because this was so much of an issue. You're going to start at 2, right?
No, that's where I'm stopping off.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Start to 2.
This was such an issue for just last year for many states across the union banning central bank digital currencies, including Montana and other states, to try to keep anything from happening on the bottom of that coming up.
Oh, it's also probably worth mentioning. I mentioned the Democrat crossover on the regulatory bill. There was no Democrat crossover on this bill.
Well, yeah, you got to let the Fed make
this one was basically just Republicans voted to ban central bank digital currencies from the Fed, and Democrats said, no, we can't do that.
You got to make sure all those elite bankers can compete.
That's what leftism is, apparently. Yeah, right. That's where the left is right now. So here's Patrick McHenry explaining things.
Today we are considering Majority Whip Tom Emmer's H.R. 5403, the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act. This bill is straightforward. It halts unelected bureaucrats from issuing a central bank digital currency, or CBDC. We believe that a central bank digital currency would be detrimental to Americans' rights to financial privacy. We've previously seen examples of the government and governments around the world weaponizing the financial system against their own citizens. For example, the Chinese Communist Party used a central bank digital currency to track spending habits of its citizens. This data is being used to create a social credit system that rewards or punishes people based on their behavior. This type of financial surveillance has no place in the United States. After all, we have the Bill of Rights, and they do not. Concerningly, it appears that the current administration does not agree that financial surveillance has no place in the United States. In 2022, the White House issued an executive order pushing for CBDC research and development. The corresponding report and the data related to the executive order the president issued does nothing to ease the concerns about financial snooping on citizens. This is why the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act is necessary. The bill requires authorizing legislation from Congress for the issuance of any central bank digital currency, ensuring that it must reflect American values and civil liberties protections. If not open, permissionless, and private, a central bank digital currency is no more than a CCP-style surveillance tool waiting to be weaponized. I want to thank my friend.
Yeah, one there.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, and so that's the major concern of the central bank digital currency, is something where cash moves into a Fed coin, we'll call it for the sake of this, and it becomes something where it's a very centralized blockchain, and you can shut off wallets, you can shut off, whatever. You can shut no payments. It creates allowances for you on certain types of goods, and it becomes a much more your social credit score defines how you can use your money within our nation.
You could either do it hard limits, right? Like the CCP, where you have a very specific budget of miles you can travel per day or something like that. Or what your political opinions will give you access to certain goods and not others. Or you could do the Cass-Sunstein approach, the nudge approach, which is to create incentives for you to do the right thing, right? So you've used up your water allowance, right? You can't buy, et cetera. Those sorts of soft tax incentives or whatever to try to get you to change your behavior.
Yeah.
Right. The classic kind of dichotomy of government management.
Yeah. I mean, if this bill actually made it all the way, like, it's not going to get through to Biden.
No, it won't pass.
It would be fascinating because, like, the way I've always thought the central bank digital currency would end up being implemented down the road is it ends up being like a government co-opting of a major stable coin that already exists, one that is centralized, and that would be Tether or CBDC CBDC or Circle.
Oh, okay.
So and Circle already kind of like plays the game quite a bit. They operate out of New York, I believe. Tether is a little bit more shady and complicated and out of Hong Kong and stuff. There's a lot of conspiracies around Tether. But I've always believed that there would just be kind of like a co-opting that ends up existing in that, if not already happening,
Right. But the Fed has put out a lot of like, we're investigating our own central bank digital currency and all these other things, along with other banks around the world, central banks around the world.
Yeah.
So, but it would have to be, in order for it to really accomplish its goal, I've always supposed that it would need to be something a little bit more international than the Federal Reserve itself, right? It would probably be you'd want it to be the NATO coin, right? Or the world hegemony coin or whatever that looks like,
Well, it's just going to be the U.S. dollar just becomes that because like the U.S. dollar already is the international currency in so many ways, right? And it's already digital.
It's just centralized.
Yeah, it's also just very inefficient because you have to go through all these like apparatuses in order to bring it over, like bring large sums of it over into other countries,
specifically
and things like that, right?
Legacy apparatuses for money transfer, wire transfer, stuff like that.
Yeah, with like remittance fees and all this stuff that comes. Where now, if you're just using, if you're just at this point using a U.S. stable coin, which would be like Tether or Circle or DAI or something like that, which DAI is decentralized in nature, but the others aren't.
Right.
DAI made by MakerDAO, which is the guy that was found dead, washed up on shore in San Juan. That we mentioned a few episodes ago. That's what DAI is. But right now, like if you're sending money, if you're coming here to work in America and you're sending money back to El Salvador, which is a very common practice that happens, and if you're just putting that in Bitcoin or a stable coin, like Tether, you don't have to worry about all these third-party apparatuses and like the 20% fees that you're getting deducted to be able to send it back to your family in another country.
Right.
You just transact just a gas fee on Ethereum.
There you go.
And that's all you're doing, right?
Right.
And it's instant, basically.
So if I wanted to buy a spot ETF for Ethereum, what happened with that?
Well, we went over that.
Oh, we already talked about that. Didn't we?
We went like reverse order.
Oh, my bad. So when is the Pudgy Penguins ETF coming then?
Oh, it's going to happen eventually. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. Eventually, we'll have Dogecoin ETFs. We'll have Shiba Inu ETFs. It's just a matter of
that's
time.
what your retirement account will be based upon someday. Your 401k. It's going to be all in on
basically
Pudgy.
already is. It's just penguins and dogs, right?
Well, that's what yours is. I mean, everyday viewers. All right. So our last topic, before we get to our OnlyFans, our Only Members section, is conservatives love to lose. So I wanted to dive into this clip from Andrew Klavan, returning to the Christ is King controversy with Candace Owens. And I love all the C's. The Christ is King, Andrew Klavan, cancel culture, coward.
Some sort of alliteration there.
Yeah.
And who is Andrew Klavan? He works at the Daily Wire. Mm-hmm. He's kind of a commentator over there.
And this tweet from Censored Man, who's got like 1 million followers. Like, that's a huge account. He's bigger than MSNBC. He confirms that Candace Owens was fired from the Daily Wire for saying Christ is King and receiving praise from Nick Fuentes. And that's really the thing that really ticks me off about this. And just dive into it and you can see how it shakes.
Target of what they call the Groypers. I just call them Nazis because that's what they are.
He's on trigonometry.
There were things going out over our air that she was saying that were being at least received, I have to say, as being deeply anti-Semitic, so that Nick Fuentes, who is a virtual Nazi, I mean, there's no space between him and what a Nazi would be saying, was praising her to the skies. If Nick Fuentes praises me to the skies, I go out and say, no, I'm not on your side. I don't know what you mistook, but there was nothing coming back. And so it was becoming uncomfortable to be on the same, station, the same venue where that stuff was coming out. And so without ever having any kind of personal animus toward Candace, or even knowing what it was she intended. I'm not even saying that was, how she intended it to be received. It simply became impossible to have a good feeling about this place that I helped build and that I love very much and that I'm very proud of, as an entity. And it was very painful to have that kind of stuff coming out over the air. And I did not want Nick Fuentes. I don't want Nick Fuentes' praise. I don't even want, I don't want him to have a happy day because of anything that I said. And so that was my basic reaction. And in that was involved the fact that some of this was being phrased in religious terms. And one of the ways this was happening was the phrase "Christ is King." Now, as I said repeatedly on the show, as Jeremy Boring, who runs the Daily Wire, said repeatedly, we believe this. We believe that Christ is king. I also believe in the cross of Christ. But if you burn the cross on somebody's lawn, it's no longer the cross of Christ. It's just a vehicle, a symbol of your toxic hatred. And so the way it was being used online as an attack on Jews,
Worth mentioning that the big villain, Nick Fuentes, has actually been reinstated to X.
Oh, really?
Elon brought him back on. There was kind of a big push to get him brought back on, and now he has like an official account again. Because he was still banned for like the last year up until like a month ago, basically.
So how many followers is he at now? I wonder.
I'm not sure.
I'm looking him up. Nick J. Fuentes, right? Is that it?
I think so.
Dude's got 320,000 followers.
Yeah, he just got brought back on a few weeks ago, I think. Because he had been basically making a bunch of anon accounts, and then they would like blow up to like 80,000 or something, and then it would get banned again, like because he legit still was not allowed on Twitter,
right? And he's like a Rumble streamer, right? That's what it is.
Like one of the biggest Rumble streamers.
Oh, really? So he was like in the conservative. I don't really know Nick Fuentes at all, to be honest. But not knowing anything about Nick Fuentes beyond the fact that he's got racist views on Jews, I guess. Right? Is that accurate?
He's very
edgy at minimum.
Yeah,
but
he's a very edgy, and he's leaned into the edginess a lot.
Okay,
because he kind of blew up on the scene through the Daily Wire.
Right.
Interestingly, when he was like 18 years old.
Right. So, but I want to just kind of moving past that, right? Because potentially he may, even if he is everything that Andrew Klavan says he is. Let's just be sure what where cancel culture is. Mm-hmm. Right. Cancel culture for the last 10 years has been discussed mostly as a phenomenon of the left feeling uncomfortable about any rhetoric on the right that crosses certain lines that they just don't like. Mm-hmm. And then when you cross that line that they don't like, that is oftentimes not, most of the time, a bad faith interpretation of what you actually mean, under the guise of power politics, right? Silencing someone for something they didn't even say. Right? For something that is misinterpreted by a group crowd full of groupthink that wants to wield power so that they shut you up. So you have to disallow Candace Owens from saying Christ is king because it makes you feel uncomfortable. You don't need to know what the intent was. He very specifically says it doesn't matter what her intent was. Right? He didn't even ask her about it. Mm-hmm. Right? As a fellow Christian, doesn't need to know. It's more important to make sure Nick Fuentes is having a bad day than to speak the truth about what she actually thinks about the world. Yeah. And so you got to get rid of her voice. That is cowardice, right? If you're going to establish the standard that the Daily Wire is the truth-telling network that's going to do these things, and then give that up the minute one of your sacred cows is at stake, you're demonstrating that you don't actually believe anything. At the end of the day, I'm going to look into Nick Fuentes. Maybe we'll do a takedown on.
Well, and he's one of those. I've never watched a show. I've only ever heard him like on other people's podcasts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he's somebody like, I disagree with him on a lot of things, but I don't think he's like the big bad boogeyman that people think he is. Like he's like a Christian nationalist. Like that's what he is. Right?
Well, you can be terrible and be a Christian nationalist, of course. But that doesn't mean you're not. It's not like It's not like he's like apologizing for the Holocaust or something like that, right?
I don't know. I'm not going to say he hasn't.
Oh, okay.
Because a lot of people say that he does, and so maybe he has.
Okay, maybe he has.
I don't know.
So if he has, then he's wrong about that, and you should the best way to solve that is not silencing him, right? It's to criticize that and to point it out and say, no, you said this, and this is why it's wrong.
He is somebody. He understands. This is something that I've gathered from him is that he's somebody that understands meme magic a lot, and he's somebody that kind of. Similar to how I've described on the podcast, there's a lot of mythologies that exist, and I think one of the things that he does is he tries to tackle those mythologies by pointing out at certain absurdities and things like that, and kind of exposing various half truths on them. So I think that's where there becomes a lot of he's a denier of this or that because he's very much poking at the things that you're not allowed to poke at because of the religious mythos that we have in our political culture.
And it gives him power saying because he praises Candace Owens for not having your perspective on Israel-Palestine, Andrew Klavan, it empowers Nick Fuentes so that she has to go disavow him in order to have a legitimate opinion, even though she didn't say, oh, just like my buddy Nick Fuentes, right? She's just saying her opinion, and he's saying, yeah. You actually, by setting up the standard that she has to disavow, empower him to now have a heckler's veto on the dialogue. You're empowering Nick Fuentes by doing this rather than saying he's irrelevant, who cares, ignore him because he's not a serious person, he denies the Holocaust or whatever it is, right? If that's actually his position, I'm not saying that it is.
Yeah. I don't think he actually does. I think he makes Holocaust jokes, and that becomes
you can't do that.
Yeah,
that's wrong.
I think that's what it more so is.
He's actually like a millennial Gen X on the internet.
Yeah, which is like a very common anonymous theme on
the blushing,
especially on New X, right?
Right. Well, and this is maybe it's a generational thing for him too. He's an older fella. He's tied up in
boomers versus zoomers.
I think that's part of the dynamic here, especially when it comes to the kind of conservative movement and the relationship with Israel and Hamas
and that's where the crux of a lot of this comes down to is when October 7th happened, it opened up a whole dialogue on the right that has splintered the right to an extreme degree, and you have folks like Candace Owens that are on opposite sides of the Daily Wire on this, because the Daily Wire really represents the old kind of boomer views around foreign policy, and there's a lot of, I think, that in that boomer Gen X kind of field of the American right, there's kind of they feel like they kind of gotta the new wave is going a certain direction against the neocons, but they still have these axioms in their belief that have been put in place since the Cold War, and they're trying to figure out, and they're confused. There's a confusion right now, and because of it, it's causing a lot of cognitive dissonance in their minds about various issues, I think. And then you have kind of the new generation Republican types that are just no, I don't want to do that. America first. Boom. Crisis king, right? And they're just what is happening? They're confused about the whole.
You don't understand that crisis king must mean that therefore you support the state of Israel. It's a axiomatic disagreement about what the fundamentals of American foreign policy and what this statement means, right? So Censor Man himself came out with it's anonymous, right? He says anonymously, 4 Daily Wire employees, all Christians, have approached me. Their identities will remain anonymous for safety reasons, and leaked information about the quote impromptu town hall that Jeremy Boring hosted at the Daily Wire Candace firing. And that there was an email, and basically it all boils down to, and it's a long little article here, that Klavan's comments here are indeed what happened, that it's related to the Crisis King thing because it's used in the wrong way by the wrong people. So because the wrong people use it, you can't use it, right? Which is, once again, a heckler's veto you're giving to the people you say you don't like, right? Rather than to Candace Owens, who is one of your people and is actually there and may be open to actually being persuaded by, but you're going to war with her, not because this issue, but because of another issue, because of the war in Gaza and her concerns about the death of civilians in Gaza. That has everything to do with it. Yeah. And that's the thing that's going on in the background that drives me crazy, is because this should be a debate. It's absolutely a debate based, but because of the axiomatic leftovers of the neoconservatives of the Cold War, it has to be power, right? And we're going to operate on the power principle here, so we got to silence.
Well, it seems very clear that the folks at the Daily Wire, with the exception of maybe Matt Walsh, their biggest issue is Israel, like the top issue. Everything else is secondary to that. And so that's like, you could have opinions on a whole variety of things that might not necessarily be quote unquote conservative, but if it's this one, that is the problem. And that's the sticky nature of where the American right is right now, is like, there is some people, for some reason, their primary focus, and Andrew Klavan, he's Christian. He's right. Like that.
Converted.
Yeah, he's convert.
Yeah.
I guess he was former Jew, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a story. But like, because of the religious basis of their views on this, that you can't get past this at all. Like, this is the core of their base of belief on the conservative front. Everything else is just kind of like salad dressing.
Salad dressing. That might be the right word.
It goes into, like, I'm reminded of when Tucker was on. Also, speaking of Tucker, he had a great interview with Dave Smith where they talked about a lot of this stuff too recently. But Dave Smith, who I know Joe just met today.
Yeah,
Joe sent us a picture of
Maybe
him
some
with
stuff
Dave Smith.
coming out soon.
But he was talking about how he was using Barry Weiss as an example. But I see this all the time in kind of this, like, the dissident crowd, is that there's certain people that they kind of like gained a bunch of popularity around certain issues like free speech. Free speech is probably one of the biggest ones because that was kind of the biggest issue in recent years, like since like 2015, 2016, 2017. But then they've like, then they try to like convert their followers into more neocon foreign policy practices. So it's like, we're all for free speech, but then there's like this certain thing happened. It's like, we have to ban all dissent on this, it's like on a very specific issue. It's like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened? Like, there's just like an interesting category of belief that exists there.
So just so that we know that we think all conservatives love to lose, not just Andrew Klavan in the Daily Wire, but also Candace Owens herself, which is an interesting debate going on, and it's a really shame that Bennett isn't here for us to dog on Candace Owens, because we've been covering her very favorably for some time, but want to throw some shade her way, which is this tweet about a very interesting debate that happened this week.
I'm not sure if this is a loves to lose thing. I might question this on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So her tweet is, quote, and this is in a back and forth where she said, ban pornography, previously, ban pornography, it is a psychological weapon intended to weaken men. And then KX Priestess, 84, pornography is a First Amendment free speech right, Miller v. California, which is a legitimate Supreme Court decision. And then her response is, which is kind of more builds out her total idea in this space. Pornography was created as a tool of enslavement, not freedom. It was created by the most depraved among human race to psychologically introduce homosexuality, pedophilia, and incest, religious sacraments to Satanists. Ban it, stigmatize it, every person who defends or profits from it.
I'm curious why you think that this is a loves to lose categorization, because it seems to me what's happening here with this, and I think where you're probably going to come down is the ban it section, like the ban it part, right? Like that, because there's like a free speech element that exists there.
Yeah.
But
so
something that seems to be happening on the right now is that a lot of these social cultural phenomenon that are kind of like quote unquote weakening men are becoming to be put very much into question as part of the general ethos of this like new right thing that's happening right now. Right.
So I don't think you make men stronger by getting the government involved in banning pornography.
Yeah. But like I'm just like on the loves to lose, like there seems to be a massive wave that's kind of happening around this.
Oh,
right?
yeah. It might even be popular. But you're for the same reason why you shouldn't be censored off of Daily Wire for having opinions in your free speech around the Israel-Palestine. You shouldn't go to jail for.
I'm just saying, like, I'm thinking, because when I'm thinking of loves to lose, I'm thinking about like game theory. I'm not necessarily thinking about ideological principles.
Also, like, if you want to grow a movement that is consistently cared about free speech, because you lose your credibility the moment you say free speech, except for when people have sex, right? And then it's not free speech anymore. And that is the actual case law, right?
Yeah.
And like the definition there, when is it pornography, when it's not?
I'm just saying. We have it in a loves to lose category. And I'm not convinced that's a loves to lose.
I get you. Right? In all,
because like I agree. Like I think the banning. I'm pro the stigmatization aspect of what she's saying. And I think that a lot of what she's saying is correct here. But I actually think that there's just like a losing battle on the ban it side. And I think that it's probably much more of it becomes much more like the drug war, where there's certain negative externalities that end up happening with the actual banning of this, where I think a lot of this just goes more deeper underground, and it becomes probably much more problematic and probably much more harmful to women and things like that.
Well, what you probably do is you actually set up a board in order to regulate what is and isn't pornography. Then the board gets captured. The board is now a monopolizing function to profit an even smaller amount of people in pornography, to then build it into all kinds of other certification systems. Once you have a certification system, then you can spread it broader, because now the government said it's safe, right? Rather than doing the common sense thing, which is protect kids from it, made sure to educate men. Men become stronger, not in a vacuum where there is no temptation, but rather in a situation in which they have to actually exercise the will against something. So if you ban it, you actually create virtue. Banning things with force doesn't create virtue. It's actually people's individual decisions that create virtue. And the process of having resistance is the thing that makes you strong. So yeah, you might say, oh, men need to be stronger. Well, yeah, sure. But that happens because of male choice. Not because you are exercising of force.
Well, and also because the stigmatization aspect that she's saying, and I just think there's the forceful aspect. Like I have my qualms with that, but the stigmatization aspect, like there is a certain area where pornography in our current culture is like highly praised. Like the amount of people that are just like willing to talk about their porn consumption publicly and all this stuff, it's like pretty wild to me. How much people
are jokes, but I don't see like people.
It's just like regular people, like friends and stuff. The amount of that are willing to just like openly talk about their pornography consumption is like pretty crazy to me.
Okay,
like it's something where it's like, when I got into my 20s and I realized how many people would actively talk about this in like such a casual way, it's like very surprising to me. Like I think that's very detrimental to the culture as a whole, because it just suggests like it becomes more normalized. Like there should be some sort of like social pressure of like, no, don't do that.
Have real relationships. Yeah, avoid like proximals. Yeah, but once again, like that's. That as much as and this is where the conservatives lose thing is, we are going to embrace the framework of the left, which says that in order to get the outcome we want, we're going to ban it, and we're going to create a board, we're going to do all these things, and we can just create the city on the hill if we just create enough laws. That is the delusion of the progressives, and you're joining them in this, and this is why conservatives love to lose. That's why my case is here for it.
I think from a game theory point, it's not necessarily a loves to lose thing. Like I think that there is like a game theory that exists there.
And once again, I think maybe in the short run, but in the long run, by embracing your enemy's framework, we almost always say that that's a bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? Not a bad idea here, right? You cannot stand on the platform of I'm pro free speech and then say this.
Yeah. No, like I agree. Like,
or at least that you even understand how power works, right?
I also just think that the actual acting of banning it is a losing battle that you're never going to actually win. Like you're not going to. The actual mechanics of attempting to ban it is
well, it's also
impossible.
Bad in theory, right? Like we have jurisprudence around this because in theory, it's also bad. Because we can't tell what's pornography and what's not. Because as soon as you ask it, the whole entire system is like, I don't know what it is, but I can tell you when I see it.
Yeah.
Well, who gives that power?
That is actually the quote. Is like I can tell it when I see it.
Yeah. So it's one thing to say, hey, it's bad. We should.
Isn't
ban
that what
it.
was in the court decision?
Yes. Yes.
That's the exact.
That's in Miller. Yeah. So that's the whole trick is like you can't. We're trying to draw a line. The line right now maybe isn't perfect. I could see that. I could see even the argument, and I'm perfectly fine with the argument that it's. Go ahead and make your case that it's all Satanism and encouraging pedophilia and incest and all this kind of stuff. That said, don't get it twisted. Homosexuality I'm not so sure about, but pedophilia and interest definitely didn't start when pornography started, right? Pornography's old. It's been around forever.
A counter to that is that type of thinking seems to be growing. That definitely, and we have had. Like James O'Keefe with OMG, we have had the undercover what do you call it? Like the stuff with like with guys that run like the algorithms of Pornhub and actually just talking about like trying to feed more like trans content and also like incest content.
But also noting that it isn't clear. No, I don't remember the incest one. I do remember the trans one specifically, but that is a newer phenomena, right? It isn't clear to me, and I don't know. I haven't looked at it closely enough to really be able to tell. What are we talking about when we're going into that, right? Is it there's like, for example, if you go to Africa, one of the reasons why Africa continues to ban homosexuality, despite all the pressure from the UN and the WEF and all these other organizations, is because the association in African traditional culture between homosexuality and pedophilia. Right. They believe if they do this, it will create more pedophiles.
Yeah, that's what got Milo Yiannopoulos canceled for talking about his conversion.
Yeah. So this is one of those third rails, right? Only mention that in the case that if you're making that case right now, that is kind of like becoming a larger case for the right. Once again, you have to be very careful about that, because once you do that, you are empowering the government every step of the way there. And that if you can't learn the libertarian insight there, you're going to become the thing that you are trying to fight, and you end up empowering the very people that you're trying to disempower, so that you can have the civil liberties to actually persuade people in the first place. Because if you can ban speech when it comes to people's sexuality, you can ban it when it comes to their Israel-Hamas opinions.
Yeah. Well, and like, to be clear, I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's this a certain element. Like, she is positioning herself in embodying where a very specific like wave of the new right is moving. And I think that there's a part of that. And like, obviously libertarians are going to take umbrage with the very specific, what she put in all caps, the ban it, right? Like that's the very specific place that is going to
stigmatize every person who defends or profits from it. That's also, it bothers me too.
No, I actually kind of agree with that.
Well, wait a minute. If you can't stand up for the people that you disagree with, because you have a principle you're standing on, do you deserve to be stigmatized? Is that the right way to think about it?
I think stigmatization and social pressures is like what libertarians should be about, because that's how you govern
once again
society.
So if not just that, if you think about it in terms of of course she should be fired, she's just being stigmatized by the process of Daily Wire. So once again, if the principle of free speech means something, it has to embody also like, it's okay for you to speech, and I'm not going to go for your job over it. That's what I hear when I hear stigmatism. I
am completely comfortable with freedom of association. My qualms with the Daily Wire for firing Candace is not necessarily that they fired her because to me it's like, we get to see behind the curtains of who these people actually are, and that's actually more interesting to me. I think that they should be completely fine firing her for disagreeing. Like, they can do what they want in that.
Sure. They're a private company.
Right? I think that there is a stigmatization war that is happening here, and there's a larger game theory at play. Like, I don't actually have problems with the Daily Wire for firing her. Right.
Well, I have problems with the hypocrisy. I find the hypocrisy gross.
Yeah, I find the hypocrisy.
I like to stigmatize it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's what I'm saying.
Non-truth telling. Right?
Well, and that's exactly where, like, I think that the widespread promiscuity and like wide distribution of pornography and the mass consumption of it that is happening is very detrimental to society. And so I think that stigmatization is actually the way, and creating certain social norms is the way of handling that. I don't think that top-down government approach, I think that there's negative externalities that come with that, that are deeper. So like, that's where, and that's me as a libertarian, like the stigmatization is the non-forceful approach to solving a cultural virus problem.
Sure.
Right?
And I'm okay if that's the result of people's free choices, is that they all say like, hey, like, dude, that's gross, right? But there's also the question of virtue within that. Like, any given individual within that, how you stigmatize what you go about when you say that, saying, I disagree, right, is one way to do it. Saying, I'm going to disagree, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go after your job now, right? And one of them embodies the idea that these are debatable topics, that we're not a totalitarian society that operates through any means to exercise, character assassination in order to get what we want. Right? Like, there's a whole range of virtue and invirtuous behavior on the positive side of that, right? That I think we could get overly cavalier about pretty quick. Yeah. When it comes to that sort of thing, especially if what you think especially if you're operating under the delusion that it's easy to define what is and is not pornography, right? And that. I think most of the people who like that tweet just then or are supportive of it, because it does very well, is
2.3 million
are
views.
thinking it is easy, and they're not really thinking through the actual implications. And this isn't me being autistic. This is me actually trying to be a truth teller in the space of what is the actual problems with this idea, right? And then also trying to hold her to her own standard, which is that she should be able to criticize Israel without.
Yeah, like to me, what I would see is I actually imagine if we were in a position of this actually being kind of possible to do, I actually imagine she would probably moderate her position quite a bit. But this is like an Overton window shifter, for the sake of game theory. Like that seems to be more so what I think that this tweet actually is.
All right, now defend this one. Ann Coulter couldn't vote for Vivek because he's brown. Have you seen this?
I've seen the hubbub about it. I've never actually watched the clip itself. I actually saw Vivek on PBD podcast talking about it, but I never actually saw the clip itself.
We're gonna cringe into a heart attack.
And apparently she just straight up opened the interview with this too.
Yes, this is kind of a cut up one because there is some like banter in between that kind of breaks it up and makes it harder. But this I think is a good faith cut up of what happened. And we just play the first few minutes until she kind of gets through her first bit here, Kyle.
Oh, and I agreed with many, many things you said during, in fact, probably more than most other candidates when you were running for president. But I still would not have voted for you. Because you're an Indian. There is a core national identity that is the identity of the WASP. And that doesn't mean we can't take anyone else in, a Sri Lankan or a Japanese or an Indian. But the core around which the nation's values are formed is the WASP. We've never had a president who didn't have at least partial English ancestry. Never.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's an interesting tour through that historical lane, but I want to pick on one point you said, which is citizenship, right? Let's talk about what does it mean to be a citizen of a nation. And it's interesting, if a lot of people trip up on this, they'll say, well, it means what you get, right? Do I get to vote or do I get some other claim? And that doesn't really work. Actually, if you look through most of American history, for example, women were citizens long before women could vote, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not about what you get. In my book, and I think that this is true with the American conception of citizenship, I think it's true of the Roman conception of citizenship, is it's about your loyalty, actually.
Yes.
To whom do you actually pledge loyalty? And so I think you and I share that in common, actually. I don't know, I've never asked you this, Ann, but I assume from seeing the things you said, tell me if I'm right about this, you're probably against the existence of dual citizenship as a concept. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Pause it real quick, yes. just for a quick side. Patrick Ben-David and Tucker Carlson go on a long rant about this on their podcast this week as well, which is a very interesting moment for all kinds of other reasons. We don't have to get into it right now.
I haven't watched that interview yet.
The dual citizenship question is like a new thing I see happening on the right. Like it's really rising. Keep going.
That is interesting.
You and I share that in common.
Outrageous.
It's incoherent. It's not just outrageous. It's incoherent. It's oxymoronic. How could you possibly have a loyalty to two different nations where the essence of citizenship is which nation to whom you had your undivided loyalty? That's what the essence of citizenship is all about. So you and I agree on so much there. But where I wouldn't say lose you, but I may fail to fully understand you.
First, I'm Indian.
Is on that axis of citizenship, what does ethnicity have to do with the matter? And I think you would be well served, and maybe this could be a great platform for you to do it, to make the case for why that, what you put at WASP basis for the American identity, how is that relevant against a backdrop of which you got the WASP seventh generation descendant of some rich guy on the Upper East Side in Brooklyn that pretends to hate this country because it's the cool thing to do, versus somebody who came here as the kid of immigrants, but pledges loyalty to this country? If loyalty was the axis for citizenship, aren't you actually committing a bit of a sin, reverting back to a conception of citizenship that has nothing to do with loyalty in the first place?
Well, I will say many of those seventh generations WASP I definitely hate. I know we have a lot of really, really bad ones. But like I said, anyone can adopt this. I guess what I just said, if any of your children marry a DAR, I would definitely vote for them for president. It's not so much, it's more President is different. You have to be natural born, as you know, which, by the way, Ted Cruz is not.
Completely
basically
irrelevant.
because of what you were just describing. Where is the loyalty? So ambassadors' children born actually in the United States are not natural born. But that's a total sidebar. I've gotten
It's
off
actually
on
not a
it.
sidebar at all. I mean, the fact that ambassadors' kids born in the United States are not citizens is actually an overlooked fact. If a kid of an ambassador from Mexico does not enjoy birthright citizenship, neither does somebody who's in this country illegally.
Yes.
Birthright citizenship either, right? So that's actually
They agree
quite
on that
important
too.
logical
She still
chain.
wouldn't vote for him.
But I go back to forget even because you get into this constitutional, legalistic, and I like that stuff, but we'll just put that to one side for a second. But the essence of American identity, I think there's a part of you that believes, I think you basically said so, that part of that identity is tied to a certain Anglo-Saxon heritage of this country, and that you're more American if you vested into that over the course of generations that are descended from that, rather than somebody who came here with a civic commitment to the country, went through the naturalization process, and then their kids may, in some real sense of the word, and the reason I respect you is that you actually have the, so to speak, the stones to be able to say it, is that you think that there's a difference in the status of the Americanness of that person. And that's where I think I disagree with you, but I want to give you the opportunity to air the case for that strand of national identity that I think we ought to just smoke out and be able to have a discussion about.
Well, the reason I mentioned the natural born citizen is I'm only talking about president of the United States. So obviously the framers thought there was something different about being president, the one man who holds one entire branch of government in his hands. It isn't to say anything about who could be a Supreme Court justice, and they have a little more power than the president, by the way, or secretary of state or governor, or obviously senator or any other position, but president, and I guess by extension, vice president. That is something that the framers did think was so important that you had this deep generation-wide loyalty. And why would they think that? Well, as many said at the time, freedom is a wonderful thing, but it's a very hard thing to learn. And one of the things, and I cite these polls in my book, Adios America, it's striking and depressing that lots of our very best immigrants just do not understand the Second Amendment. They do not get the First Amendment, and you take polls of them. Should you have a right to bear arms? Should hate speech be banned? And it's noticeable that large percentages of immigrants and children of immigrants really don't get that. And I think that is the point of having natural born citizen only for president, that this is a really delicate thing we have, this freedom to bear arms and there being no such thing as hate speech.
Here, I'll pause it there.
Yeah, so
Went longer than I thought we were gonna go.
no, it's okay.
I was finding the conversation interesting.
Get lost in a little bit.
Yeah.
So this is my case. Ann Coulter is the final boss of conservative female boomercons. Because it's like, this is the thing that's always circled around, and I've for so long said, no, these folks are not racist. They're thinking about this in terms of values and like the ethnicity of the people at play when it comes to their values and whether or not it's compatible with America. But then when really confronted with the idea and saying, is Anglo-Saxonness a set of presumptions about the nature of certain ideas, of civic ideas, or is it pigmentation? And she falls down at, well, it's pigmentation, right? It is enough to vote for a subpar candidate for it. Like for someone who you agree with less because you have more faith in pigmentation of the melanin content in their skin and than you are in whether or not they actually have the ideas that we inherited from an Anglo-Saxon tradition that I very much have an allegiance to. Because I think it's superior in so many ways. But what's the least important thing to me is whether or not you're brown.
Yeah, it's to me it feels like it's like a low resolution way of trying to guess if somebody's a good ethos fit. Like that's the way that I a good book on analyzing kind of a hypothesis on where the new right is going is The New Right by Michael Malice. He wrote it like 6 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. And and he kind of wrote about all the different factions that are spawning in this, what is the kind of like the new right in the Trump era and everything, in which, and he goes through like the radical libertarians, the America First MAGA folks, all the way to like actual quote unquote white nationalists, right? And it actually got me curious on digging a little bit deeper into what are some of these people that I kind of disagree, that I disagree with, but are kind of in that kind of extreme faction of the new right. And I kind of started to grapple with this question that she's kind of digging at right here, where what it seems to me that these folks are doing when they're talking about this, because to me, like, I feel like Vivek and I probably agree on like 95% of things, and he's like a very good ethos fit of where I like to see the new right going, right?
The way he's talking about things makes you feel confident about it, because he's demonstrating a depth of knowledge on these things that I don't think you can get to unless you've really done the work, right? Is that kind of how you're teasing that? Right.
Well, and there's like, is he a good culture fit for like the general broad strokes of the movement? And I'll never forget, I can't remember what the guy's name is, but Michael Malice, when interviewed like a very famous white nationalist, and he was asking him of like, and a lot of it came down to, is it a culture fit for the broader society? Like that's, your leader should be a culture fit for the broader society. That's kind of what it came down to. And like kind of a good low resolution way of viewing that is like, are they the same skin color of you? Because like then we have like a kind of a shared bonding experience kind of a thing that exists. But then Michael Malice asked him, was like, well, what about guys like Thomas Sowell? It was like, well, he's basically white. Like that's what it came down to the because he's like prominent black economist that's like a very important economic figure for right-wing politics, right? Like he's a very important figure in that space, but he's grew up in Harlem. Yeah. You know? Right. So like, but he kind of grew into a little bit more of a quote unquote waspy culture because of his educated background.
I think that's a bailout though. Yeah. That's bullshit. He's bullshitting you at that point, right? Because he says it's important in one metric, and as soon as it's convenient, I can jettison it.
Yeah, but like what it is it seems to me that they're applying like an 80-20 rule, where like 80% of the time, this is like a good way of making educated guesses about like that. That seems to be what they're doing. Right?
And but the problem with it is it's a gross generalization. It has exact same problems of all collectivism. That's why racism is an error of collectivism. That's why individualism is a superior moral system, because what it says is that it's up to the individual to determine who they are. You're not determined by your past. You're not completely determined by your race or even your culture, right? These things are up to individuals, and so what it demonstrates is the communitarian impulse within the conservative mindset is in ascendance, maybe in some ways among certain groups, right? And we see that in all kinds of other dimensions that we point out too. And when it comes to like the Ann Coulter part of the right, obviously a big part of that's always been there, right? That the anti-immigration component is driven by communitarianism, and that creates errors such as not being able to see that Vivek is the best guy on your side, and yet you still can't vote for him
very much
because he's brown, right? And then what it does is it's one of the ways that conservatives love to lose. Rather than focusing on ideas, she'll back into ideas whenever it's convenient, and then use race whenever she doesn't want, whatever as a proximal for ideas, rather than just going on the ideas themselves.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's kind of like profiling, like police profiling. Like there was always like the stop and frisk, like worried about the but I actually there's like a similar thing there where it's like it could potentially be a useful low resolution way of kind of making quick guesses about things. Yeah. But is it going to go wrong often? Probably. Yeah. Also, because you are going to have people that are, like very specific individuals that like, they might fit into your culture better than what your profiling system does. Right?
It's the same error as the Twitter bannings, right? You fit the profile of a Russian bot, so you got canceled, right? Mm-hmm. That's a gross generalization, right? And then that they're wielding power.
I am a Russian bot.
Yeah. So, anyways, I just speaking of Russian bots. Anyways, I want to point this out because I think at least a component of what makes the right a healthy movement, and the conservative, libertarian, communitarian, pro-civil society, anti-government society of the American culture is our ability to say, hey, this is how we distinguish each other, even as we're a bit of a big tent. and how we point at here's where the errors are at. So we're in constant dialogue with those errors. And this is like the best example we've had in a long time of that kind of conservative error or communitarian error.
Although one of the things, because I'm actually going to steelman the case a little bit, even maybe the more extreme people than Ann Coulter on this, because a problem that I had with a lot of people that are generally, I think, would be on my side, with the way that they approach these types of arguments is they just kind of denounce it as like, oh, that's just racist, that's blah blah blah. And like I think that there is like nuggets in there that are worth considering in what they're talking of like viewing the cultural aspect of it.
Okay.
With this, and I'm trying to be careful with my words because I just know when it gets like on the recording, it's going to be.
I'm not trying to be racist, but
beyond my meaning. Yeah,
yeah.
like there's a certain thing where like I saw there was a problem that I saw with the way that I think libertarians and certain factions of conservatives kind of approached this type of Ann Coulter or even like Richard Spencer back in the day, of the way that they tried to slam down, of just not even taking into consideration the broader points of their arguments and just straight up denouncing it as racist, right? Like I think that there's a epistemological error that ends up happening there where you're actually kind of missing perhaps some broader points that might exist in that ethos.
Well, here's kind of, okay, so when I say the difference between ideas and pigmentation, I think pigmentation is racism, right? It is that there's something special about race that connects you.
There's a magic word.
Let me finish the point. I know, yeah, I get that, right. But we have to, at some point it does apply, right? At some juncture, it is a real thing and not just a magic word, right? And I do agree, it's overused. One of the reasons why this is such a bitch that she can get away with more when it's vague. When they can claim opposing minimum wage is racist, right? Then when we see actual, like, hey, your ideas are a composite of your skin tone, then we can't identify racism anymore. So we can't actually point out, well, this idea actually places race above individual characteristics and therefore racism. Right? If going on the old school definition of racism. So so what I'm trying to do here, Kyle, is actually make you space to say like, no, that's real racism. And maybe she's dabbling in that here. And what I really appreciate part of this is Vivek's ability to be like, okay, let me hear what you had to say here, and like give her opportunity to actually try to give space to that.
Well,
and then she fails to actually do anything.
That's actually what I want to get at. Is like I very much appreciate Vivek's handling of this, because what I find is I think that there are broader points that are being tried to be made in this dialogue, and I think there are some nuggets that exist and are worth examining, especially when it just comes with like the descriptive nature of human behavior when it comes to politics. Like there's like very important like the thing about Vivek, I think Vivek does have a problem in the right because he's brown when it comes to actual electability, especially in the future when he's in 2000, when we're talking 2028, right? Like, I think that there is, because of the descriptive nature of human behavior, like I think that there is something with that. But just straight up denouncing, just be like, well, that's racist, let's not contend with the rest of the argument. Like because that's what I see with the problem. And that's why I have so much respect for actually both of these guys having a dialogue here, because like it's very... This is a sticky subject that is part of the convo.
So I think Ann Coulter's making an error here, that she's placing
I agree.
the group characteristic above the individual characteristic, and therefore not being a good individualist, which is the American tradition, which is the Anglo-Saxon tradition she's trying to defend, right? So that hypocrisy and those sorts of things, setting that aside, and that
well, and also most of our problem is white Western liberal women, right? I mean, I'm looking at the voting data, and I'm just like, that's our problem.
What is so great about this is that rather than Vivek just saying like, that's racism, and being a bitch about it, he instead takes it like a man and he says, okay, explain that. Okay, we agree on this part. Here's how much we agree. Explain why I'm still out of category for that. That's how you actually handle that. You don't handle it like a little, wuss and just be like, oh my God, that's racist. I can't hear anything you have to say now. And the funny thing is the response from the left was, look at how much of a cuck Vivek is for not crying racism and curling up into a ball. Instead, he's like, okay, what do you mean by that? And he actually engages. So that's the thing where I'm like, that's the healthiness of this. That's the good thing of this. But it does show that, the magic word thing is still captured on the left and not on the right as much. But that doesn't mean Ann Coulter's not wrong. right? I think she's wrong, and you agree she's wrong, right?
Yeah.
The
like Vivek is like the best politician to come into existence in the last decade.
Yeah.
Easy, right?
And he's also right about that. Ideas are more important than skin color when it comes to determining any one individual's merits for an office. Duh, and so then past that.
Well, I also think there's actually another element of this might be Ann Coulter, like almost her argument might exist better in like a European country.
Oh, for sure.
Like this was actually a point that I made in the Ireland coverage, which speaking of Ireland, we're blowing up on Irish Twitter
big
right
in
now.
Ireland,
Irish TikTok right now. We
half
got
a million?
Yeah, more. Yeah, 500,000 plus views on some of our Irish coverage. But this was kind of a point that I made with their prime minister that stepped down, where he doesn't seem like a good Irish culture fit because he's like this half Indian, but he's like this half Indian, gay, anti-Catholic kind of guy. And you're just like, that seems weird for Ireland, especially when their country is like 5 million people. It's not 350 million people. Like America's very diverse. It's like a very it's a very different thing. Like I think
it's also the native country of Ireland, where America is unique amongst the nations in that we have an Anglo-Saxon
because we are
background.
actually a country of migrants and immigrants and stuff, where we actually have a much larger base. And that's the hard thing, is because we're actually a massive group of subcultures.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So we have unique challenges for that. But additionally, that if the guy was half Indian, right, that but Catholic and conservative, I wouldn't care, right? But it's the confluence of many things that obviously sets it off.
It just
even
makes
further.
you think that we're like, oh, well, because they had this experimentation in Ireland, which was kind of like, we're going to try to be more globalist, and we're going to try to do all these things with the European Union. So like he kind of, it's what I would guess. I don't know the exact specifics on his kind of rise, but it's kind of like that Obama thing of like, hey, we're proving ourselves as like we're joining this new kind of widespread cultural movement that's kind of international, and then now. The Irish people are kind of like, maybe we should preserve some of our Irish culture. You know, like that seems to be kind of what's happening.
And I guess the some people have a vision of America that's not the one that you just described, Kyle, of a bunch of immigrants, right? Their vision of America is, no, there was white people here who made it great and awesome, and now we accept some people here and all that kind of stuff, and that's what makes it. They're a danger to take away the greatness of it because of the pigment of their skin. And I'm like, no, they're a danger to the degree that their pigment of skin might be associated with certain ideas, but the pigment of skin is a like I said, low resolution proximal for any individual. It doesn't tell you about the individual. Well, it's just it gives you something about the group. And the problem with group calculation is it's inherently inaccurate and not helpful, right? It's most helpful when you know the individual, because it's the individual, like your model of race and the society and the individual and this relationship between each other doesn't work. That your ideas come from your race, right? It goes the other direction, and that's the important insight of the Anglo-Saxon tradition as well.
Well, there's also an element. Just we're talking about conservatives loving to lose, or Ann Coulter loving to lose here a bit. Just looking at the demographic shift towards this kind of new right America First movement that is happening, there's a massive amount of Black and Latino voters that are shifting in that direction.
Asians,
right now,
South Asians as well.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if more South Asians, who are the highest earning demographic in America, started consistently voting Republican. That would change a lot about our culture.
Well, and that actually speaks to the broader point.
But as long as you keep saying the game theory of, well, you're South Asian, so I'm sorry, you're not a WASP, so you're not part of the movement, that is a quick way to lose. Right? That's the best way to lose. And she's like, she's supposedly this game master who's all smart about the long-term demographics. Is like, you want to lose Ann Coulter because you don't have a vision for the future because you're born in 1962 and you're not really engaged at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she's definitely, I think, checked out from where she's kind of like lost the plot of where the movement has kind of moved.
Yes.
Well, and that's just kind of the big thing here, is because the general ethos of this wave of new right stuff, it is very predicated on kind of an axiomatic basis of America First. Like there is a kind of a nationalist patriotic movement there, which is devoid of are you a WASP or not? Like it is actually just like, no, we have problems in America. We need to focus on American problems. We're all Americans. We care about this country.
Yeah.
Like that is kind of the basis of it. And
specifically rejects hyphenization, right? It's saying you're not an African American, you're an American. You're a Amalgam American.
That's actually a good way to think. It rejects the hyphenization thing that
and that's
the left
old.
has done.
That's Rush Limbaugh conservatism that goes way back. That old culture came up in, but now that now that we're here and we're actually getting grounds, we got to have the boomer female final boss and Coulter come in to dunk us into the toilet and say, "Oh, actually, you're not qualified because your pigmentation."
Yeah. Well, and it is one of those things where like Vivek is just a really good culture fit on that ethos.
Yes.
Like that ethos that is this new right phenomenon.
Yes.
I would say. Yeah.
As demonstrated. All right. So last story of the day, I know we're going a little long, is the Cato Institute attacks the LP for hosting Trump, where our boy Joe is right now laying it down, sacrificing it all to spend his time in the swamp. Oh, no. I got to get you my login to WAPO.
I'm not paying for that bullshit.
I pay for it. It's a tax write-off for me. All right. So anyways, basically, I'll bring it up so I can recall the details correctly because I didn't type them out. Peter Gottler, which is he's the CEO of the Cato Institute, has been
my favorite
for quite some time. Oh, I love Cato. They do a lot of great work. The whole like hating on Cato thing is,
it's
boring
again
to me.
It's a culture problem.
Yeah.
There's like all these things, and I'm such a culture maxi. There's a culture problem that they have, in my opinion.
Okay, tell me about the culture problem of Cato while I bring this up. I'm gonna screenshot this for you, and so then you can see it, because I actually, as much as I think he's wrong, and I'll try to summarize his case, but I have this particular screenshot I want to point out here.
Are you sending me the screenshot?
Yeah. Go ahead and talk while I'm getting it together.
There's for people that aren't in the know of the small potatoes game that is libertarian politics. There's a big kind of distinction. It's hard to exactly categorize it, but there's kind of different factions of libertarians, and with the Libertarian National Convention that's happening right now, in recent years there was a takeover from a group that's called the Mises Caucus, and they're kind of this like very Ron Paul style oriented libertarian,
populist libertarian,
like kind of right wing populist libertarian might be a good categorization. I'm not sure right wing is. It's complicated, but there's kind of that strand within it, and then there's kind of a lot of the more beltway think tanky libertarians that would probably categorize in like Reason Magazine, the Cato Institute, which are big publication, big think tank
who do some good work.
Who do good work. Like I'm not saying that they don't do good work.
Yeah.
But there's a different kind of. And especially when you talk to the people there, you start to, as somebody who is kind of, that I would say is like a self-described libertarian, oftentimes when you talk to people there, you're like, oh, there's like a cultural distinction between us.
Yeah.
Like we have a lot of similar views on policy when it actually comes to politics, but we have kind of different ends in mind and different like a broader ethos, I would say.
Formulations.
Yeah,
so the formulation of Peter Gottler in this article is that libertarianism is just classical liberalism, right? And that there is no American vision of the difference between libertarianism and classical liberalism.
I hate that word.
He completely kind of washes over all of the evolution of thought of Rothbard and Mises and a lot of the, and just basically says, no, the only one that really existed out there was Hayek's formulation. And in Milton's formulation of libertarianism, and just kind of does that, which is what their tendency to do is, just like the other side sometimes does the same thing. They just kind of ignore those other traditions and the kind of history. Just kind of say it all started with Rothbard, for example. But then he goes on to say Trump isn't a libertarian, right? That's his case. And then he gets into...
no one's saying he is.
Yeah, literally no one's saying he is. But the one reason to have him there would be to do is like... But this is like that vision of what you said. You said like the Libertarian Party as party, but also like PAC, like to advance ideas. And we have friends, for example, that are skeptical of that vision, right? Because it's like they should be trying to get people elected, not as like trying to promote libertarian ideas.
Well, and actually, this is one of the things that this is study game theory, people. like think about positive EV situations, like positive expected value. oftentimes what gets trapped in political dialogue, it's just like there's like a one or the other. You can only like do one or the other thing. And it's like, no, like if this is the third largest political party that exists in America. It's obviously not the same size as the two major ones that matter the most, but there is a certain element of like bullying and being able to like chip at things that you can do, while also having good message spreaders. Well, also like you can do, there's like an all of the above approach that you can have here. Like everybody's like, if they're not doing my specific thing that I care about, then everything's just like, oh.
Yeah. I was going to formulate it as tactics neutral, clear vision, but tactics neutral, of saying like the only tactics I'm really willing to disqualify ones are ones that actually undermine your ability to do the thing you want to do. Right. So, for example, one of the things he makes the case in here is that the Republicans and Democrats are addicted to executive powers, and they're willing to do extra legal things such as canceling student loan debt or the January 6th riot. He tries to drain the January 6th riot on the actual Republicans, say that it was like a Republican operation, as if that's exactly what it was, like an actual attempt to overthrow power, which is like, he's got the same argument here as freaking Destiny, right? Like, it's just like, what are we doing? And then,
well, here's the thing. A lot of the people over there do have the same arguments as Destiny. They're like very similar.
Yeah,
they're very similar.
They're very similar people. Right? They're similar lifestyles, similar everything.
Yes.
So pop up Discord real quick, Kyle, and bring up the screenshot I want to show, because this is where I think the most interesting part of it is with this particular part of it. But today's party leadership has been taken over by a faction. This is part of the LP. It is well outside the bounds of libertarianism altogether and appears to be comfortable with right-wing authoritarianism. Right. Yep. A classic there is, if I remember right, that link goes to the Angela McArdle saying, if the Supreme Court declines to hear the cases, there absolutely should be a, quote, insurrection.
Some tweets issued from state libertarian parties and other libertarian operators can only be described as shockingly racist or anti-Semitic. A lot of magic words there. Okay. The Libertarian Party of Michigan, for instance, posted a cartoon portraying Jews as puppet masters of the Democratic and Republican parties and would be more welcomed on the alt-right than among true libertarians.
What that's talking about is actually AIPAC. Right.
Yeah.
But of course, this guy pretends like AIPAC doesn't exist.
It wouldn't in that crowd. Right?
This is not what traditional libertarians represent and isn't aligned with the position of most Americans. And the two-party duopoly is stacking the deck against true political competition in our country. Americans are making it clear they've had enough. And that's actually true. There's some polling out there that suggests that third party is really, there's a lot of people considering for the first time. Quietly, they're moving the United States in a more libertarian direction in many important areas. This is my favorite one, such as foreign policy. Only 57% of Americans in 2023 believe America should take a, quote, active part in foreign affairs, compared with 71% in 2002. Drug legalization, expansion of school choice. Why do some of these things exist, Kyle? Why do all of a sudden so much of Americans now say it's okay to take a more insular vision on foreign policy? Gee, I wonder, Mr. Cato Institute guy. You think it's because of Cato Institute's amazing foreign policy briefs? No, it's because a dude who is a real estate mogul said, no, the war in the Middle East was bullshit. And he said it crudely. And he blamed the Bushes for it.
And he was publicly on that side prior to him ever running for election.
Exactly. The drug legalization, who backed off with the DEA on various different prosecutions of medical marijuana and things like that when they became president? Was it Obama? No, it was Trump who did that. And then, so Trump persuades more of the public to be a more America first on foreign policy. He restrains the DEA in many ways to prosecute drug legalizations happening bottom up in Oregon, all these things under his watch, right? He's the one who expands school choice with Betsy Davos and all that kind of stuff. A lot of that momentum picked up during his time. And then like these things happen with Trump under the helm and gets zero credit from this cat, because it's way more important for him to virtue signal how he's better than the current people who run the LP than the actual policy. And this is where it just bothers me.
Well, there's a deep
of needing to lose.
This is one of the things about about that crowd, that culture fit, is there's a deep embedded Trump derangement syndrome that exists within them. Like if it was a different guy, if it was a different that was having a similar message, they probably would be a little bit more comfortable with this. But like in that crowd, there is a very oh my God, we're afraid of Trump. Oh my God, he's crazy right-wing authoritarian, blah, blah, blah. Like that stuff exists in there. And it's just like, I mean, Trump, like from a libertarian metric, has been one of the, here's the thing. I have plenty of problems with Trump, but Trump has been one of the best presidents of the last century, like from a libertarian metric. Like that actually goes to say about how bad all the rest of the presidents were. 'Cause, like, there's plenty of problems to have with Trump, but like when it comes to it, like he's more directionally on our side, I would say, than any other of these, with the exception of like Vivek. Like he's way more directionally on our side, and I think that there is a strategic element of like, let's try to get a seat at the table and help steer the ship a little bit.
And then additionally to that, if it was Vivek, this guy would oppose it because he's a Republican, number one. Number two, Vivek couldn't happen without Trump.
Yeah. Well, so, and also like I would like to. I remember when Vivek dropped out of the race. I remember Reason magazine. They had a very kind of like snide remark about like snide article.
We covered
about
at the
Vivek.
time. Yeah.
I don't think we did. I think that this was in a group chat. But that being said, maybe we did.
Yeah.
Then they gave a whole like giving praises to Chris Christie. It's just like. I'm sorry, I would way rather be on Vivek's side than Chris Christie. Like I don't have that many nice things to say about Chris Christie.
That's an easy thing to say.
But like it's in that culture.
Right.
The message that is being signaled to me is that in that side of libertarianism is that Chris Christie is more directionally on our side than Vivek.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, like we might not be the same thing.
Right.
Like we both use the libertarian labels, but we might not be the same thing.
And let's also know when you're kind of using like the big words here, like that side, that culture, all that kind of stuff, these things do exist. And they were really clear yesterday when this article came out, because everybody who tweeted it was all on the right side of my thing saying Cato Institute guy blasts the LP, and all the people who tweeted it were working for Reason and Cato and all these organizations I like, and even a lot of these people I like, were just saying, guys, you're kind of you're making an error here, and we're trying to help you correct your error. The populist, the way to actually wield power in America is to make it compelling for normal people, not to just talk into the void of professional libertarians. That's our point, right? We're saying that Trump is an imperfect mechanism. So is Vivek. We are all imperfect, right? So given that, what is the thing that we can do to drive the larger game theory in the direction that we want, being tactics neutral but principled at the same time? And to me, it's this sort of thing is as destructive as the things he's pointing about the LP having bad messaging, saying things that are that he says are racist, or in criticizing AI PAC is not anti-Semitic, but I'm not sure exactly what he's going on for.
Well, and there is there's an element where I think, and I'm stealing this from Jeff Dice, the former head of the Mises Institute.
Oh, you can't say that word.
Which is a problem for these types of people. They don't like the Mises Institute.
Right.
But there's a large swath of libertarians that I think they want progressivism through libertarian means. Like they actually like a lot of the end cultural goals that progressivism is offering, which is where the problem of and where like the Mises Caucus guys, they're actually much more on board with the cultural end goals of the right, but they want it through libertarian means, right? So like you end up having they agree with this side, but it's actually the 4-quadrant meme, like of the political stuff. It is actually kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't map exactly well, but it's kind of like, there's people that kind of want a right-wing ethos and are a little bit more comfortable with like authoritarian measures to get there. Then there's like the right-wing libertarian types that they kind of enjoy that cultural ethos, but they don't. And then there's the same thing with they want the progressive ethos, and it's like authoritarian means versus libertarian means of getting there, right? Like there is
when
something
you say progressive,
to that.
What you mean is like the cosmopolitan,
egalitarian
celebration of all things nuclear family, right? Is what you mean. That's what you kind of mean is like that.
There's a certain like libertinism. There's a certain kind of like disregard of the nuclear family. So, there's a certain I think there's an egalitarian ethos that's embedded inside of it, and it comes up in a lot of these corporate side of those organizations.
What do you mean by egalitarian in this case? You don't mean equality before the law? And I'm asking this as a devil's advocate.
Yeah. No, not necessarily. Like I think that like in the same way, like they are very hyper concerned with the magic words of racism. They're very hyper concerned with the magic words of anti-Semitism. Like those are things that they get the ickies when there's anything that could be like dancing around the subject, right? Like there's a certain like global order tolerance type of ethos that exists in them as well.
Right.
And it's
so this is where I'm like, I always feel like I'm an alien, right? Because I am culturally conservative in many ways. Like that's how I lead my personal life for the most part, right? But I don't see the angle in which we're sitting here and we're saying, I understand this. When people say we need to celebrate the use of pornography, I'm like, ugh. Like it's gross to me, right?
Yeah, but
sometimes
that
reason gets
happens
into that.
on that side,
right? The reason will get into it,
and prostitution and things like that,
right?
Like, yeah.
Well, yeah, and then there's that angle of celebrating prostitution versus just saying we shouldn't have it be illegal because that has all these social effects, which I will defend.
I think that there's negative externalities
of
the mass kind of banning and prohibition of those things.
And it's bad in principle too.
But I think it's generally bad culturally. Generally bad.
Sure. Well,
there's
depends on what you mean.
There's like an 80-20 rule.
I'm not maybe. My point being that there is the maximal there seems to be that there's a line in there that you're saying that's egalitarianism, right? And I'm like, I don't know what you mean at that juncture, or even progressivism, right? Progressivism is like our culture has to progress beyond the nuclear family. Then I'm understanding what you're saying, right? And to the degree to which there's a group of people who are kind of in that is actually more important than the libertarian ends for certain groups of people.
There's a certain that crowd. I had a lot of problems with that crowd during the Summer of Love in the BLM riots.
Yeah, right.
There was a deep unquestioning belief in the BLM that happened in that crowd.
I also think their response to Ukraine was very interesting
also
too. I saw a lot of those
stuff,
guys very quickly go like the war of aggression. This is World War II all over again.
Because they tend to actually what it seems to be. So there's actually a broader libertarian point here. Is I think the more quote unquote right wing libertarians, they're much more concerned with the nefarious nature of government, where the left-wing libertarians often look at it more as a technocratic sense, and they're just like, it's just inefficient, and they're a bunch of knuckleheads. Yeah. Like where the right-wing libertarians have a much more Rothbardian approach, where it's like, this is a legally mandated mafia that is trying to exert control over people, right? Where the left-wing libertarians is like, they're just so inefficient.
Yeah. Or the other one is
government just gets everything wrong.
The other one's like coastal cosmopolitanism versus like rural flyover state rejection, right? Mm-hmm. There's a difference between you are a tyrant trying to impose yourself on me versus like, oh, this is just inefficient from like an angle of I'm the kind of radical openness of the more cosmopolitan way of looking at life, which I actually am a big favor of. Like, I think in general, people should be open and they should do all these things, that they should justify their conservatism in an open environment rather than a closed environment.
Yeah,
right?
But it's just whenever somebody tells me that they're radically open about something, it's always like, yeah, you're radically open about specific things. That always ends up being the case. And it's like, well, what about this idea?
Yeah.
Nope, yeah. Not open about that. Yeah. Anytime I talk with people that are radically open about things, it's just salad dressing. That's all it is. A lot of these words are just salad dressing.
Well, no, but that doesn't mean the principle is wrong, correct? Like the principle,
I'm
just trying to say,
they never embody it.
But the ideal would be that they did, right?
Yeah. But but the problem is they never do. Humans tend not to. Like, that's the problem.
Sure. I mean, like, okay, so if you were to say society works best, right? You would describe yourself as being a really open
I'm
person.
open to like hypothesizing about ideas. I think there's a lot of ideas that are bad, but like I'm very open to having the dialogue. A lot of these people tend to not want to have the dialogue.
Oh, for sure.
Which is kind of what I was getting at with the Vivek and Coulter thing, is I ended up seeing, and I had problems with these crowds all the time. Like, I remember when Dave Smith, who Joe just met today, and we were just on Tucker and Rogan last week. Yeah. I remember when he had the conversation with Richard Spencer and just had an open dialogue with him, and you had the Cato people saying that Dave Smith is racist for having a conversation with Richard Spencer.
The exact same argument as Andrew Klavan, which is that you have to denounce him. You can't have the conversation with him. If he has a nice day, you failed. You know, that bullshit. Right?
Yeah, it's that mindset. Like, there's a mindset thing there that is what separates us in a lot of ways.
Well, and it's not. What I want to make the case too is it's always been my case that this has to be a reconcilable thing, right? To me, it's always seemed clear that the end goal should be to bring together a coalition that says the cosmopolitan versus more rural forms of libertarianism or of right-wing thought need to be a unified coalition that's willing to actually unify. And what I see is like libertarians are willing to coordinate with the communitarians or the conservatives and things like that, but not within their own group, right? And that to me has always been the feeling like an alien sense.
Well,
right?
the problem is
because it seems like these should be reconcilable gaps, like
it's
whether
not,
or not
though,
they are indeed open.
they have different religious beliefs, and I don't mean like Christianity or whatever. Like I mean like the core essence of their beliefs and what makes them tick are actually very different. But they have a similarity of being kind of like, yeah, but we don't like the government doing this stuff. And that's the only thing that binds them together. But that's not like a deep religious principle, right?
Well, I would suggest that the more rural libertarians need to learn that there are that they play important roles in actually doing something in the mainstream of academia or in the mainstream of the think tank world and stuff like that. That's an important role for them to play.
But here's the problem: is the other side of that
needs to reconcile
too, because
I totally agree.
What it seems to me, and when I'm looking at the history of the splits between those, the more quote unquote rural, like kind of, because like, which is like the Mises Caucus or the Mises Institute is like the rural think tank, right? Is there became a zero tolerance for these people within that sphere of the Beltway libertarian types. Like there became they're too cozy with people we don't like. They make us look bad. They blah blah blah, all this stuff, right? And it tends to be them that's taking the snide petty shots at, like it tends to be the Beltway libertarians that tend to be the ones that kind of initiate all the snide petty shots that kind of start this war. Like, and a lot of it goes back to the history of kicking Rothbard out of Cato and all this stuff, right?
And that's what it seems like. It's a Gordian knot, right? It's like this escalatory spiral that we're just constantly in.
It's Israel Hamas.
Yeah, right. Just libertarians. Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking, is that just that.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is because of that, like, and because there's deep religious problem. Well, and this becomes the thing where when you see a lot of these like right wing guys that are just like, well, we hate the libertarians, they're just like a bunch of wokies, right? Well, that is true for a large swath of libertarians, but it's not true for the ones that have recently taken over the party, right?
Yeah, right.
So but those woke libertarians, the quote unquote like wokies that are really concerned with egalitarianism, because there's deeply embedded in that kind of that milieu, they don't really belong in the new right. Because they like, and I'm not saying that as like we can't have them. It's like they're not the same culture. They're not the same. Like they're not like the same culture adjacent even.
Yeah.
They have very different goals and means, or not means necessarily, but they have very different goals and kind of what are the foundational parts of their beliefs. And at some point you kind of got to reconcile, are we the same thing? Like, I'm not necessarily sure. We are the same thing when it comes to like our views on government, kinda, but a lot of the things we aren't really the same, at least on a cultural perspective.
Totally understand. I think we've been going on this long enough. Probably ought to call off here. We will continue talking about this like everything else as it comes back up, but that was a good discussion. So I think that since we don't have Joe to actually launch us out, how does Joe actually exit us on things?
Thank you.
He's much better.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for sticking around this long.
This is the Human Reaction Podcast. Follow us on things. We're all links below.
Discord, join it.
Yeah.
Do all the things.
We're here. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to become a member and support the show financially, check out humanreactionpod.com.